Secret love is one name, the one you want to hide from everyone, but you can't hide it from yourself. And that name is Joshua Oldley. It's a new school day at school. April still can't concentrate on the lesson, and in her notebook, instead of assignments, she draws all sorts of nonsense, thinking about her own thoughts. Angle 1 equals angle 2. Angle 3 equals 180 degrees. The teacher methodically dictates the terms of the problem. Teacher Ian Birch noticed that someone wasn't listening to him at all and called out loudly to April. Confused by the surprise, the girl got up from her seat. John Birch sternly asked her to repeat what he had just said. Angle 4 equals 72 degrees, April replied confidently. The teacher opened his mouth in surprise, for the student had just given him the absolutely correct answer. The teacher stated that if April knew the answer, it didn't mean she could not listen to him. He told the girl that she might not even hope to pass the exams with luck alone. But April noticed that she always did well on her exams. Must not be luck after all. Birch slammed his hand on the table. She's bickering! Outrageous! Ian Birch offered to teach the class in his place, since she was so smart. April listened to the teacher's shouting with dignity and silence. She then stated that she could teach a lesson, but a teacher can't sit idle. The girl's wit stirred the whole class. The children laughed, and April wondered if she shouldn't have said that. "April Brooks! Come back tomorrow with your parents!" the teacher yelled in anger. The bell rang for recess. The class ended, and April let out a sigh of relief as she stepped outside. The girl was soon caught up with her close friend Nora Gilson. She was surprised that April had provoked Bald Birch again. After all, her mom had already been called to school twice this month. April thought she hadn't provoked him, but that he just liked to call her parents. Nora stated that April could be proud of herself anyway, if only for her perfect grades. "But you're completely missing out on the other points," Nora pointed out. April looked at her friend puzzled. What did she mean by that? Nora asked if her friend was going to the bookstore. April was puzzled and asked why she wanted to go there. A friend reminded her that it had been Kevin Wilker who had invited April there. The girl said she wasn't going to go. She thought it would be better to use the time to think about how she could deal with the Bald Birch. April opened the list of numbers on her phone to text her brother. She wanted to know if his university was going to have a holiday weekend soon, and if he would be able to come home tomorrow, at least for a day. Nora asked her friend why she wouldn't go out with Kevin, because he was so handsome. April was staring at her phone, waiting for her brother to answer. She didn't think Kevin was handsome, so she told her friend. However, Nora countered that it wasn't just her, but a lot of people thought the guy was handsome. April sarcastically said that in that case, they should all get together and go to therapy together. Nora couldn't believe that her friend really wouldn't go. Nora assumed aloud that it was because April's parents had been called to school. She asked her friend if she was afraid her mom would cuss, and she suggested that she call her dad this time. But April declared that she wouldn't call either of them. But what's she gonna do? If her parents didn't show up at school, bald-headed Birch would definitely call them at home. This time, April was going to get her brother involved. The message came through. "Ah, he finally answered!" April quickly opened the message. Adrian wrote that if April is home, he won't be back. These words struck the girl like a thunderbolt. Bus stop. April arrived and got off at her stop. The girl walked home leisurely, thinking about her own thoughts. If she had known her brother would be against it, she would have been nicer to him sooner. April decided to sneak into the apartment unnoticed, so she opened the door cautiously. It got nothing, however, and her mom spotted her right away, excited that EPI, April's childhood nickname, was back. The girl pondered on what she should do. After all, she couldn't have her mom or dad show up at school this time. Mom was holding a tray of food, so she offered to help her carry it to her brother's room, noticing that he had come in alone. What? Did Big Brother really come back after all? April felt a little relieved, hoping that now she was saved. Her mom said that Adrian had been playing ball nearby and had gone to take a shower as soon as he got back. April was anxious to see him, so she quickly grabbed the tray of food from her mom and rushed to her brother's room. What happened to that kid today? Her mother couldn't understand since when April had been so cordial to her brother. April, meanwhile, had already opened the door to Adrian's room and, holding a platter of sliced fruit in her hands, tried to give him the most welcoming smile possible. "Brother!" she exclaimed. But he didn't seem to be paying any attention to her at all and sat staring at the phone with a cigarette in his hands. A mute question lingered in April's eyes. She couldn't believe it was her brother. It's like he's completely different. April stared at him intently, unable to look away. The guy finally pulled away from the phone and lifted his gaze, looking at her intently. It was April's first meeting with Joshua Audley. For a while, April stood in a stupor in front of this guy, unable to utter a word. I wonder if the smell of tobacco in a room can make a person confused. April watched in amazement as he put out his cigarette, not understanding how her brother could have changed so much. "Bro?" She stretched out uncertainly. The boy looked at April questioningly. She thought for a second that he might be smiling with his eyes. God, was that really her brother? April lost her mind in an instant. In a trembling voice, she wondered if in the few months her brother had been away, he'd had plastic surgery. The guy thought for a second. Then he smiled sweetly. "Uh-huh," he replied shortly, confusing an already dumbfounded April. April asked in amazement, wondering if her parents had given the okay for this. The boy she'd mistaken for her brother smiled even wider. He motioned for her to come closer and see if he was better. April stared at him silently, her large eyes rounded in surprise. A sudden voice behind her brought April out of this stupor. A familiar native voice asked her in a haughty manner to move out of the way. Oh, God. So the little brother is standing right behind her back now? But then who is sitting in front of her? What, smitten by my beauty? My brother asked jokingly. It looked like he had just gotten back from the shower. April turned and stared at her brother in bewilderment. The guy she thought was her brother couldn't contain his laughter. April blushed and, pointing at the stranger, asked who he was. Toth ironically asked how April could forget so quickly that she herself had just called him brother. How awkward that turned out to be. Adrian stated that it turned out to be quite hospitable. April was ready to fall to the ground in shame. How could she even call him brother? God, now he was definitely going to take her for sick. April didn't know how best to get out of the situation. The boy suddenly leaned closer to April and introduced himself, saying his name was Joshua Audley. April looked at the new acquaintance with confusion. Joshua added that he is a friend of her brother's and part-time neighbor. I see, April replied, not knowing what else to add here. Adrian, it turns out you and I are alike, Joshua addressed his friend. Only in your dreams, Adrian said indignantly. Joshua wanted to continue the topic, but April immediately rushed over to him, trying to stop him from telling him what had happened during his brother's absence. But Joshua managed to finish saying that the girl was asking him if he had plastic surgery. Oh, God! April didn't have time to shut that chatty guest's mouth. She looked at her brother apprehensively. He, too, looked at her with some bewilderment in his gaze. His and his sister's gazes met. What a little thing! He muttered angrily. April froze in place, waiting for her brother's outburst of indignation. Oh, what's going to happen now? His brother asked if April seriously thought he needed surgery to look like Joshua. He stated that there was no way he'd ever do that, and he didn't think he'd ever need it. April, on the other hand, thought that he might well have done something like that. She tried to justify herself by saying that her mom hadn't told her he wasn't alone. So, the girl thought it made sense that she was wrong to see Joshua in the room. With a twist of his finger at his temple, Adrian said he didn't see where it could be logical and asked his sister to turn on her brain once in a while. Or one would think you dumbed yourself down, Adrian verbally finished off his younger sister. April blushed even more. Resentment and anger were building in her soul. There you go, she thought, looking at her brother. Tears came to the girl's eyes and she started sobbing. Not again, said Adrian doomily. A few seconds later, April sobbed loudly across the room. My brother and his friend looked at each other in confusion. The daughter's wild roar was heard even by her mother, who was in the hall watching TV. She turned off the sound for a second. No, she wasn't imagining it. April was really sobbing. She walked into Adrian's room and asked what was going on. Adrian turned around and looked at his mother, startled. He shouted at his friend, asking how he could have hurt his little sister. Joshua was simply dumbfounded by such a statement. "What?" he asked, staring at Adrian. A tearful April walked over to Joshua and put her arm around his waist. She already knew what to say to her mom. April just lied to her mom about her brother hitting her. The woman lashed out at the older child in a rage, resenting him for hurting his sister again. She loudly scolded the boy for shifting the blame again. Without giving her son the slightest chance to justify himself, his mother dragged him out of the room by his ear. April skillfully feigned resentment until the door slammed shut. As soon as her mother took Adrian away, April was visibly cheerful. She was triumphant in her heart, glad that her brother was going to get what he deserved. "You're not crying anymore?" asked Joshua, standing behind her back in surprise. He looked at April and noticed a few tears trailing down her cheek. Joshua pulled a paper handkerchief out of the box. He carefully ran this handkerchief over the girl's cheek, offering to wipe away her tears. Shit. April suddenly remembered that she'd originally wanted her brother to go to school instead of her mom. What was she supposed to do now? The girl thought for a second, and after thinking about it, decided that since this option is no longer appropriate, then it is necessary to just find a replacement for her brother. She looked conspiratorially at Joshua. "Bro?" she shyly began to tell him. He looked questioningly at April and wondered what she wanted. April hesitated a moment, but decided to ask Joshua if he could help her with something. April inquired if Joshua was free tomorrow. "What if he isn't?" he said with a smile, answering the question with a question. April indignantly declared that was the wrong answer. The girl was sure that he could find a couple of free hours. Otherwise, she threatened to tell her mom that he was with his brother at the same time. At the same time? What kind of nonsense is that? The boy was perplexed. Joshua asked April if she thought at all before she spoke. April reminded him that she was still young, so she was forgiven. Still, Joshua wondered why April would want to know if he was free. April stood hesitating, wondering how to ask him for help. It was an original request. However, she had no choice. So April asked if Joshua could pretend to be her brother and come to meet her teacher. "Did you call your parents or something?" asked Joshua in an understanding tone. Oh, what a good guess. April didn't say anything, and the boy realized he'd guessed right. It was strange to him, however, that the girl made this request to him rather than to her brother Adrian. April pointed out that she'd just complained about her brother to her mom. If she asked him, he'd turn her in for retaliation. Joshua countered that her brother wasn't what she thought he was. At that moment, Adrian entered the room. He looked at his sister in silence. His judgmental gaze was more eloquent than any words. April lowered her eyes guiltily. An awkward silence reigned in the room for a while. "Let's go," Adrian said to Joshua and tossed him his bag. Joshua was already at the door and turned to say goodbye to April. But what about their conversation? The girl couldn't let him go that easily. She ran up to Joshua and grabbed his arm. "How come you're leaving already?" asked April, and suggested that Joshua stay for dinner. But he politely declined, promising to do it next time. What else you got in mind? It's not like he and April have a deal yet. Geez, maybe this guy's senile. The girl clung to Joshua's hand and didn't want to let go until he answered when that next time would be. His brother asked his sister what kind of drama she'd decided to cause with a man she knew nothing about. Adrian glared at his friend and was quick to point out that his sister was only 12. April intervened, arguing that she was already 13. Joshua looked at April with a smile and asked what school she was in, assuming she must be in her second year by now. But April replied that she was still on her first one for now. Joshua smiled sweetly and looked questioningly at April. April regarded his look as curiosity and realized she needed to tell him a little more about herself. The girl said she goes to Rising Sun Middle School and is now in her first year of first grade. April then introduced herself, noting that she was also called EPI at home. "Are you doing some paperwork or something?" my brother asked ironically. "Well," Joshua sighed, Then he leaned over to the girl and promised to see her next time, calling her little EPI. With those words, Joshua gently pinched April's cheek. "You know, when it's coming, right?" he added. Adrian asked his friend to finish up, reminding him that they still had to go to university. April touched her cheek and blushed with embarrassment. Ah, how dare he pinch her! Embarrassment and indignation at the same time as inner indignation swept over the girl. However, she couldn't say anything and just stared at her brother and his friend. They just met. How dare he pinch her? Besides, he also called her baby EPI. On the way to the university, Joshua told Adrian about his sister's request to come to her school and talk to her teacher instead of her parents and brother. Adrian now realized that the reason his sister had not let them go was because she needed something. Adrian said he couldn't make it tomorrow and asked his friend not to worry if he couldn't make it either. He simply said that he would turn her in to her mom. However, Joshua promised to go even though he had things to do. Somehow he couldn't forget that sweet face and April's beautiful eyes. "My name is April, but at home they call me EPI." Those words, along with the image of his new acquaintance, kept popping into Joshua's head. Joshua coughed, trying to chase away the intrusive thoughts of the girl. Adrian looked at his friend questioningly. Joshua clarified that he just didn't want to cheat on the baby. Bus stop. Spring is being felt in the street. Blossoming trees and birdsong create a romantic spring mood. April boarded the bus that usually took her to school. The transport moved off, and the girl, lost in the crowd of other passengers, plunged into her thoughts. She still couldn't get over her brother's friend. For some reason, the moment he had pinched her cheek again, asking if she knew when their next meeting would be. I wonder if he'll come to her school. He who lies becomes a puppy, she remembered a naive children's proverb. Although in April's opinion, if Joshua didn't show up, he'd be more suited to the nickname Decrepit Dog. Suddenly, the bus braked very sharply and April didn't keep her balance. She couldn't stay on her feet and almost fell right off the bus. Fortunately, some passenger held her back by grabbing her backpack from behind and thus prevented the girl from falling. April turned to look at her savior. "Oh, that's the same Kevin Wilker she was supposed to see the other day." He looked worriedly at April and asked if she was okay. The girl replied that it was okay and she would live. Then she gripped the handrail tightly so she wouldn't have another accident like this and thanked Kevin for his help. He kept sneaking glances at April. Kevin admitted that Lily had told him about April's parents being called to school. The boy said it with a pouty indifference, but EPI knew he cared. However, the girl was angry at Lily for not keeping her mouth shut and reporting everything to Kevin. Kevin explained that he'd asked her himself, since April hadn't shown up at the bookstore. By the way, his parents had been called in too. April wondered why that had happened. Kevin admitted that in his case the parents were called because he had ignored his class teacher. April sighed and said that she had a similar situation, and her class was so boring that she didn't want to listen to the teacher. Kevin said he thought so too. April didn't hesitate to say that it was obvious, reminding him that he'd come in last on the last test. He said smugly, however, that he just didn't want to show how smart he was. After a brief pause, Kevin awkwardly coughed and asked April what place she'd gotten last time. "First," she answered without too much modesty. Kevin, feeling embarrassed, promised to try to take first place next time. "Are you seriously trying to get first place?" April asked, glancing judgmentally at the boy. He confirmed that he was determined to do it. Kevin didn't understand why April had asked that, so he wondered what was wrong. April just wanted to remind him of something. Mentally putting a crown on her head, the girl told Kevin that it was simply impossible. The boy didn't understand what he'd done, and what he'd done to deserve such an attitude from April. While talking to Kevin, April had been thinking about something else entirely. All her thoughts were focused on her recent acquaintance, Joshua Audley. I wonder if he'll come. April hadn't even given him her phone number or explained the whole situation. He was all she could think about in every class. In gym class, April was so absorbed in her thoughts that she couldn't even throw the ball in time. Meanwhile, the school day was about to end. Did Joshua know that April's class ended at 16:30? The lessons were over. The bell rang and the time on the clock announced that the school day was over. The students in the classroom were busily going home. Some were going for ice cream. Others had other plans. But the atmosphere of joy at the end of the day was especially strong at the end of the day. Everyone had long since gone home, and April was alone in the classroom. It was already 5:30 on the clock. The girl looked hopefully at the phone. Her hands were trembling. "Liar!" she shrieked, jumping up from her seat. Realizing that there was probably no point in waiting any longer, April began to pack her backpack. After packing her study supplies, she disappointedly grabbed her bag and got ready to leave. April was so upset that she didn't immediately notice someone entering the classroom. She only noticed when she slammed into the boy who had entered. Someone in a familiar voice apologized and asked if it was really first A class. April's heart was ready to jump at that moment. She looked up in surprise. "Oh my God, it's Joshua! He's finally here!" When April had given up all hope and was preparing for the worst, he finally showed up. April's lip tightened and tears welled up in her eyes. "Blowing snot again, little girl?" Joshua asked, smiling. He patted the girl lightly on the head, comforting her, and asked if April was really that afraid of the teacher. Then he asked her not to cry and promised to go to the teacher's office with her and get a reprimand instead of April. Puffing up her cheeks, the girl resentfully wondered why Joshua was taking so long. The guy, perplexed, clarified what time she thought he was supposed to arrive. April claimed that her class ended at 5:30. Joshua's excuse was that he didn't know her class ended so early. He tried to apologize to the girl. "I was wrong, I'm sorry," he added quietly, leaning over to April. The girl lowered her gaze and tugged at his shirt sleeve. "Let's go to the teacher's lounge," she asked Joshua. "Brother, the teacher's going to complain a lot," April warned the boy, adding that he would just have to go along with everything. EPI asked Joshua to say as little as possible so they wouldn't be exposed. Otherwise, it would be a complete failure. Joshua noticed that it all sounded kind of scary, especially when April said it. "Don't drift," she encouraged the boy. Thoth laughed, saying he understood, and promised EPI that he could handle it. Ah, here they are. April and Joshua entered the teacher's lounge. "Are you here?" asked Birch, adjusting his glasses. April reported that she brought her older brother with her. Joshua said hello to the teacher and introduced himself as April's brother, saying his name was Adrian Brooks. The girl nodded affirmatively. Mr. Ian Birch, in turn, also introduced himself and thanked the lad for coming. "There's that girl again! How many times have you called her in?" A colleague sitting at a neighboring table asked wryly. Teacher Birch stated that to the best of his knowledge, she, too, had called on a student on a number of occasions. April noticed that Kevin Wilker was standing next to the teacher. Kevin looked at April and met her gaze. Then he met Joshua's gaze and looked away. A few more times, April and Kevin glanced between themselves. Joshua noticed it too. He's already drawn his own conclusions. The teacher said they could sit down for now, as he had to go out for a while to photocopy the materials. He promised to come back soon. April looked at Joshua. Joshua beckoned the girl over to him, beckoning her with his finger. I wonder what he wants from her. Nevertheless, April decided to approach him. Noticing April and Kevin's glances, Joshua decided to ask if such a little girl could really be friends with boys already. Yeah, how could he even ask that? April was wary. "What? You're the one who dated girls when you were my age," she replied indignantly to Joshua. The guy admitted that he wasn't hiding it. Joshua stated that he didn't see anything wrong with dating at her age. The timing of it drove April into the paint. She was literally amazed at his insolence. Frowning her eyebrows, she stated that he was too old for that. "Oh, that's how you get branded!" Joshua was surprised by that statement. He wondered why April was calling him brother instead of uncle. EPI pressed her lips together resentfully. "Oh, got it, uncle," she replied. And with that, it was as if she had dealt Joshua a blow below the belt. It seemed that Joshua had expected a very different answer from the girl. So now he sat waiting for the teacher, looking a little frustrated and puzzled. Meanwhile, a girl entered the teacher's lounge. She said hello and asked where teacher Lillian Flotz was. Kevin's teacher rose from her seat and introduced herself to the girl who entered, assuming she was the sister, her student. Kevin asked his sister why she was late. The girl didn't answer her brother's question and looked silently in Joshua's direction. Joshua threw her a counterglance. April noticed the two of them, and especially the way Kevin's sister blushed at the sight of Joshua. Looks like something's definitely connecting these two. I just need to figure out what it is. While Kevin's teacher was talking to his sister, Joshua was tired of waiting and kept asking April when her teacher would be back. Joshua was tired of waiting and kept asking April when her teacher would be back. Little EPI, I'm going to fall asleep from boredom. Joshua stretched tiredly and asked if EPI could tell him if there was anything interesting to tell him so he wouldn't be so discouraged. April stated that she does not want to do that. Joshua didn't understand why the little girl was such a pest. Joshua looked the girl in the eye and apologized for keeping her waiting. "It's okay. Don't worry about it," she replied dryly. The guy stated that he'd like to hear April at least give him a compliment if she doesn't want him to become a robot cop. But the girl stubbornly replied that she didn't want to and wouldn't do it. Joshua called the little girl a pest and a meanie. At that time, the teacher finally came in and apologized for being late. Joshua immediately made a serious face. April, anticipating a serious conversation between the teacher and Joshua, said she would go and get some water. Glad that she'd found an excuse to get out of there at least for a little while, EPI quickly made her way to the water cooler that stood in the opposite corner. Soon she was already drawing water. EPI managed to overhear Kevin's teacher talking to his sister. The teacher said that Kevin was a good boy, even though his grades were bad. The sister asked what was the reason for the decision to call the parents. EPI heard the teacher say that it wasn't really a big deal, and the reason was that just yesterday, Kevin had suddenly run out of class. It was after that she decided to call her parents, because the incident made the teacher very agitated. April looked at Kevin in bewilderment, and she and he met eyes again. The boy was looking at her warily now. At that moment, April wondered if Kevin had a problem with his head. Meanwhile, it's 6 o'clock in the evening. Teacher Birch finally started talking to Joshua. He said that April had a talent for giving him headaches. Birch described yesterday's situation, twisting it in his favor, adding that it was the first time he had ever had such a troubled child in his class. Joshua looked at April and asked if it was true, and if there had been another incident like that. The girl lowered her head guiltily. "It's good that you told me such a thing. What if it had been your mom in my shoes?" Bald Birch added to the fire. He stated that that was the reason he had called her parents. He then praised April, saying that she was a very smart kid, and if she continues to do well in school, she can get into a good high school. Jan Birch offered to have a discussion with the girl at home. Joshua replied that he understood the teacher and would talk to her when they got home. Finally, the conversation ended, and they walked out of the teacher's lounge. As she stepped out into the hallway, April thanked her named sibling, and he wondered if she was going home now. Of course she was going home. What else was she going to do? Joshua recalled that he had promised the teacher he would take disciplinary action and gave April a sly look. The girl tensed. What does he mean by that? April wondered if he was really going to do that, and noticed that her brother had never done such a thing when they went to see the teacher. "Really?" Joshua asked. EPI assured that she was telling the truth. Joshua picked up the phone, aloud revealing his intentions to ask Adrian about it in person, to make sure April's words were true. The girl stated that he couldn't do that, since if he did, his brother would know that Joshua had gone to the teacher's office today. "If he finds out, the whole world will know about it afterward. Don't ask him," EPI pleaded in panic. But he continued to mock the girl, saying that without asking Adrian, he wouldn't know if EPI was telling the truth or not. Joshua teased April, "Get the phone up higher." She was jumping around the guy trying to get the phone and begging him not to. Heels clacked in the empty hallway. "Hi." Some girl said hello to Joshua. Both he and April looked at the girl questioningly. It was Kevin's older sister. She looked at Joshua with confusion and asked if she could get his phone number. The girl hesitantly held out her cell phone to him. "Please give me your number!" She was already begging, promising she wouldn't bother him. "I'm sorry," Joshua answered her. He told her he didn't have a phone. April looked at her name brother in disbelief. What did he just say? God, what a ridiculous excuse. He's holding the phone in his hand right now. I guess it made sense in this situation. April realized that the girl liked Joshua, but at the same time, he didn't have feelings for her, so he didn't want to give her his number. But April, seeing the indecision of both of them, decided to intervene. "Bro, can you give her our home phone number?" she blurted out. "Ha, what a twist!" Joshua didn't understand why she'd suggested it. April continued, adding that Joshua had recently talked about his 29 girlfriends, and that just the other day, there had been an opening. Joshua froze in bewilderment, waiting to see how this would play out. "How about that SS?" EPI asked Joshua, pointing her finger at Kevin's sister. She was still holding the phone and looking at Joshua confused, not sure what was wrong. Joshua looked equally confused. The girl, discouraged by April's words, slowly backed away. Haha, looks like Epi's plan worked, and she handled this situation masterfully. Joshua realized that this was April's way of thanking him for his help. Seeing that the girl was still here, Joshua asked EPI a question, but did so in a way that that girl could hear. He asked why his sister was giving away his secrets and naively expressed aloud his fear that her words would scare the girl into leaving. He stated that he was actually planning to spend the day with his sister. "But since she likes you so much, why don't we get to know each other?" He began dictating his phone number. The girl finally realized that she was being bullied, and she turned and walked away quickly, burning with shame. She could hear her scolding Joshua in the distance. As soon as the girl was out of sight, Joshua turned to EPI and asked what he should do now that he was one girl short of 30. April remained silent. She was pleased with herself and the fact that she had managed to pull this off so cleverly. The guy leaned over to EPI and smiled. "How about you?" he asked her quietly. "Bye!" a blushing April said quickly and turned around to rush away from him. Oh, he grabbed her backpack and the girl had to stop. He asked April in a stern tone where she was going. She answered that it was getting dark, and she was afraid that her mother would worry if she didn't get home on time. Joshua said that there was no need to be afraid, because her brother would walk her home. "Oh, come on, don't! Don't! Why bother yourself so much? The station is right next door. Get there quick before you're late." EPI tried to get out of it. Joshua was naively touched by this feigned concern for his brother. Joshua wondered why he hadn't felt that concern before. April declared that it was just a prank, reminding him that she had helped him after all. The girl asked to be let go. "You helped me," the guy wondered. April explained that she'd noticed his confusion and that he'd been too embarrassed to say no to the girl, so he hadn't wanted to give her his number. EPI looked at Joshua indignantly and said that her generosity knew no bounds, so she didn't even need his gratitude. The boy laughed at how cleverly the girl could get away with it. He'd picked up on the fact that he might have liked that girl, and April could have ruined it with her behavior. EPI, however, countered that he was here to help her with her teacher, not to make dates. Oh, and the little girl was lecturing him now. Joshua noticed that she'd asked him to put on the show. He added that the little girl should be more diligent. Besides, he told EPI not to mess with any fools. I think he means Kevin. Joshua pointed out that she was too young to be friends with boys. April was outraged by his words. Joshua remarked that it would be very sad if her parents found out that he was pretending to be her brother. He asked EPI not to hurt herself. The girl replied that it would be okay if he didn't come here again. The boy looked intently at April, waiting to hear her response to his request. April replied that she understood. That answer satisfied Joshua quite well, and he smiled. "Good girl," he said and stroked Epi's head. He made her blush and blush again. Joshua finally got April home, and against all the girl's fears, everything went fine. "Okay, we're here. Come on, go home," he told EPI. The girl took her backpack and ran off, waving goodbye to Joshua. "Bro, see you again!" she shouted after him. The guy smiled, turned around, and walked in his own direction. Finally, Epi's home! After closing the door, the girl tried to recover for a while and kept touching her cheeks, which were red and hot with embarrassment. Despite what she told Joshua, EPI still didn't know if she'd ever see him again. Remembering that her apartment balcony overlooked the sidewalk where Joshua was supposed to be leaving, April quickly ran out onto that balcony. Joshua was still standing on the sidewalk, not far from Epi's house, talking to someone on the phone. Oh, I wonder who and what he's talking to right now. But April, no matter how hard she tried, still wouldn't be able to hear a word. He was far away. Joshua turned his head slightly. God, he could see her, couldn't he? EPI froze in fear. Then she quickly hid, crouching on the balcony so she couldn't be seen. But it seemed that someone had noticed her. April's heart was racing. It felt like it might jump at the mere sight of Joshua looking in her direction. It was so strange. First, love. It was such an unforgettable feeling, like blood freezing in your veins. Just one look makes you want to live and sing. You could fly. If only he were with you. A new feeling that she hadn't known until now suddenly settled in April's heart. When April's heart finally equalized its rhythm, she walked back into the apartment. The girl was quite hungry and remembered that there should be strawberries in the refrigerator. EPI quickly made her way to the refrigerator, opened the door, and took a quick look at the shelves. The delicious strawberries in the plate were still on the shelf. Oh, it's beautiful! Now April's gonna get to eat some good food. A few seconds later, the girl was already sitting on the couch and eating berries in front of the TV with gusto. Suddenly, the house phone rang. EPI quickly ran over to pick up the receiver. Mom called and warned EPI that she and Dad would be late. She also asked the girl to put the rice on to boil. April quickly agreed and hung up the phone. Suddenly, the girl noticed the front door handle twitching. EPI was alert, wondering who it could be. It's just Adrian coming home. He looked at his sister with a disgruntled look. It crossed paths for a second, and Epi's clever mind came up with a great idea. She shamelessly told Adrian that his mother had asked him to make rice after he had washed up. What a clever inventor! Toth pointed out that he hadn't told anyone about his return after the Dragon Festival, so Adrian didn't believe his mother would say such a thing. April, however, decided to lie to the end. She assured him that she didn't know anything, and her mom had really told her so. She then suggested that he call his mom in person and see if he didn't believe her. Adrian stared at his sister in silence. Then he suddenly took the plate of strawberries from the girl. What kind of outrage is this? EPI indignantly ran after her brother, screaming, "Why did he take the strawberries away from her? Did it taste good to you? Did you buy it to eat?" her brother Riley inquired. The girl lunged at her brother, screaming that she had taken it from the refrigerator. She also said that she was the first one to get it, so it belonged to her. The brother replied that in that case it rather belonged to the refrigerator. Adrian said that if Epi's reasoning was the same as Epi's, then since he had taken the strawberries from her, they belonged to him now. The girl jumped next to her brother, demanding that he give her the berries. At that time, Adrian's cell phone rang in his pocket. As her brother pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, April took advantage of the moment and deftly snatched the bowl of strawberries from his hands. Adrian cast a glance after his fleeing sister. The boy sighed. "That little girl could drive anyone crazy! What a sly little thief!" Adrian answered the phone. While he talked away on the phone, April quickly devoured the berries, trying to eat as many as she could. EPI ignored his words until she heard Joshua's name. The girl strained her hearing to the max. That name made April wince. Instantly, the image of this handsome adult boy appeared before her eyes. Engrossed in her own thoughts, the girl dropped the bowl of strawberries on the floor. Her brother turned around and looked at the berries scattered on the floor. Adrian glanced worriedly at his sister. EPI was blushing and looked like she wasn't herself. What's wrong with her? His brother thought. Taking his eyes off the phone, he asked EPI if she wanted to watch a cartoon, like The Cute Goat or The Gray Wolf. EPI was annoyed that her brother was talking to her like she was a little girl. She indignantly declared that she wouldn't watch it. The girl was replaying her brother's words about Joshua not going home and the fact that he was on campus. EPI thought about it, picking up the scattered berries. I wonder if he could have gone on a date with his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Adrian finished his phone call and hung up. EPI called out to him. The girl asked if it was true that her brother was the only one who didn't have a girlfriend at uni. Adrian didn't know what she was even talking about and countered that he was the most popular on campus. His sister, on the other hand, made a serious face and said that he could do with a good face. Ah, those words clearly hurt the guy. He pinched his sister's cheek and pulled her aside. Threatening April with a fight, he asked if she remembered the guy who came with him last time. Of course, April remembered. How could she forget him? But all she said out loud was, "So what about Togo?" "He said we look alike," her brother replied angrily and pulled her cheek even more. April decided it was best to keep quiet for now. When her emotions finally subsided, Adrian let go of her cheek. April asked, wondering if she'd done something to offend Adrian's classmate. My brother didn't immediately understand what she meant. "I don't understand. Am I that ugly?" the girl asked, clearly meaning that her brother was the ugly one. Adrian looked at April in bewilderment. EPI stated that even though she and her brother looked alike, he was still scarier than her. "Do you know why I have a single bunk in my dorm?" my brother asked with a smile. He explained that the reason was because he was so beautiful that everyone was lining up to see him. "I came home to relax. That's how cool I am," Adrian continued to praise himself. EPI stopped listening to him and just drifted off into herself. For some reason, the words about the single bunk made the girl think. April's thoughts drifted away. Somewhere where Joshua could be a handsome adult. At the family dinner, Adrian asked his father if he wanted to help him with his things. Then he wondered suspiciously what trickery had occurred to him this time. His father stated that his sweet little sister was just worried about him. And for that matter, Adrian should agree. Adrian was generally okay with it, but worried that the girl might get torn up since his stuff was heavy. His father, on the other hand, had implored him to make sure that didn't happen. Adrian continued to eat his dinner in silence, that everyone had already decided everything instead of him. Looks like April's plan worked, and here she is standing outside the campus. The girl called her brother and told him that she was already at the gate. He was very surprised that she was actually there. He stated that he was too busy right now to meet her. He told her to go through the gate, turn right, and then just walk straight ahead. That way, April was to go to the 9th male dormitory to room 525. Saying that, the brother just hung up the phone. April wandered down the designated route. It was an unfamiliar place to her, so she walked and looked around. Suddenly, she spotted her dad's car. She was standing nearby with her trunk open. The girl walked closer, and the first thing that caught her eye was an old toy lying on top of the packed boxes. "Even the stuffed toy is ugly," the girl mentally noted, thinking it was just right for her ugly brother. She took the soft red fox with a smile. Suddenly, the girl froze, sensing someone's presence behind her. April turned around, and her eyes rounded in surprise. Ah, that familiar face. Those familiar lips. April's heart quickened when she saw Joshua in front of her. "Where did this little thief come from?" Joshua inquired with a smile. April froze in surprise. This was one guy she hadn't expected to be here. "And why are you stealing my stuff?" he asked, leaning over to ask. April stared at one point and didn't know what to say as the words seemed to be stuck in her throat from excitement. Calling April a sissy, Joshua asked what she was looking at. "God, he's standing so close now!" Confusion and excitement swept over the girl. She held out a soft toy to Joshua and replied that she just didn't know it belonged to him. She then explained that she was here to help with the move, just to help. There was a look of disbelief in Joshua's gaze. It seemed to show in his eyes that he understood the real reason for her visit here. EPI started to make excuses that if she knew who the toy belonged to, she wouldn't have touched it. Joshua asked in surprise, wondering if she wouldn't have helped him, knowing that it was his stuff. He wondered if she had a conscience, reminding her that he'd helped her recently. April, for her part, reminded him that he had just called her a thief. Josh smiled, noting that he was just kidding. "Offended?" he asked guiltily, leaning over to the girl. The guy said he understood and offered to give her this stuffed toy as an apology. EPI was quick to pick up the toy. "This toy is ugly," she remarked. Joshua didn't share her opinion and thought the leaf was perfectly normal. EPI asked the guy why he bought such a scary toy. EPI asked him why he had bought such a scary toy, and he answered that he hadn't bought it and didn't remember how he had gotten it. But April handed him back the soft fox, saying that if someone gave it to him, she didn't need the toy. Joshua silently pulled his things out of the trunk and closed the car. He stared at his friend's little sister for a few seconds. "Come on," Joshua invited the girl in and stroked her head. As they entered the building, they stopped in front of the stairs. Calling EPI a little girl, the boy asked if her backpack was heavy and offered to help her carry it. The girl noticed that it wasn't heavy and reminded him that she was 13 after all, not 3 years old. Joshua asked if she was sure, noting that they were going up to the 5th floor. "Do you really think I'm like a child?" the girl replied indignantly, adding that the 5th floor wasn't a problem. April wondered if Joshua would carry her on his back if she couldn't get up. The boy looked at EPI puzzled. For a few seconds, he regarded her with a smile, as if assessing his options. "If you want, I can take you upstairs," he said confidently, and emphasized that it was no problem for him. EPI proudly replied that he could only do that in his dreams. "Good, then I'll dream about it," Joshua said. They finally reached room number 525. Even from in front of the door, they could hear how noisy the room was. First into the show was Joshua, followed gingerly by April peeking in. The girl stared at someone in amazement. In the middle of the room, her brother Adrian sat on a chair as if nothing had happened. He was so engrossed in his phone that he didn't immediately notice Joshua and April walking in. "You said you were busy, so you couldn't meet me," the girl said indignantly, turning to her brother. The one emphasized that she had made it here after all. Wasn't that cool? "Adrian, is that your sister?" one of the guys in the room inquired. It was his roommate, Bob. A second roommate named Ricky bellowed in surprise, calling his sissy cute. Adrian angrily threw a glass at Ricky and asked him not to use language. He said that Adrian wasn't the one to lecture him. Ricky wanted to say something else, but seeing Adrian's gaze, he quickly fell silent. He apologized for not filtering his speech and asked Adrian's sister not to repeat himself. Bob told Joshua that they were going to have something hot to eat tonight, and he asked if he would go with them. "Tonight?" the boy interjected. After thinking for a bit, he replied that he was passing tonight, as he would be busy with some things. Bob wondered what else he was up to. He also asked if Joshua had a girlfriend. April listened intently for Joshua's answer. Without waiting for a response from Joshua, Bob declared that a friend couldn't do such a thing, remarking that their room was like a single organism. "If you want to find a girl, you'll have to think of me first, and find a girl for me first," he said indignantly. No, me first, interjected Ricky. He asked for one with a normal personality. The whole time April stood there not herself. "Don't you guys like my brother?" April asked suddenly. The words slapped Joshua in the face, and he blushed and dropped the phone. For a second, silence hung in the room. But soon, Eppie's words stirred everyone present. One told her that she could eat whatever she wanted, but not talk. Another asked EPI if her brother was bragging. Another one of them called Adrian a jerk. EPI covered her ears so she wouldn't hear all the nonsense. Bob looked at Adrian and joked with a smile that he looked pretty good from this angle. Adrian rudely asked his comrade to shut his mouth. "Okay, you guys have fun and I gotta go," Joshua said suddenly and looked at EPI. He then walked over to the girl and stroked her head. He let EPI have that toy if she wanted it. After that, the boy left the room. EPI looked at him confused. "Joshua hasn't thrown it away yet? What a weirdo." One of the guys marveled. April looked at the old fox sitting on the computer desk. Ricky had noticed that Joshua probably kept the toy as a decoration for his bed. "Keeps her as jewelry," EPI mentally repeated. "Is that a gift from her girlfriend?" queried April. Ricky bewilderedly stated that a girlfriend was out of the question, since Joshua just didn't have time for them. Bob, from the top tier of the bed, confirmed that their roommate, and indeed busy as a dog, slouched. It seemed to him that that toy was a prize for entering some contest. Adrian reminded them that it was time for them to eat. Ricky thought that they really should hurry. If they got there late, it might be too crowded. The boy didn't hesitate to lift his t-shirt, intending to change right there. Adrian threw an angry glare at him, and after tossing Ricky a t-shirt, told him to go do it in the bathroom. Right. My sister's here, Ricky said guiltily, and all three friends headed for the bathroom with t-shirts in hand in a friendly manner. April was left alone in the room. She took the soft old fox and stuffed the toy into her backpack. It didn't want to fit. Ah, well, she should start by putting her backpack in order. With these thoughts, the girl pulled out the contents of her bag to fold everything more compactly. Adrian came into the room and asked his sister if she wanted to go out to eat with them. He promised to walk her home afterward. April replied that she would be home afterward. In that case, her brother said he could walk her to the station. EPI had already packed her backpack and put it on her shoulders. "Wait for me!" she shouted to Adrian, who was already at the door. There was one notebook left on the computer desk in the room, which EPI hadn't put in her backpack in her hustle and bustle. 10 o'clock at night. Ricky and Bob were already in the room, each sitting at their own computer, doing their own thing, talking to each other about something. Joshua walked into the bathroom. He had already just completed all his hygienic procedures, and rubbing his head with a towel, went out into the room to his comrades. In the room, Adrian was talking to someone on the phone. When he saw Joshua come out of the bathroom, he turned in his direction and said to someone on the phone, "He's here. You tell him yourself." Adrian then handed the phone to Joshua, explaining that his sister had told him something about a certain thing, and told them to sort it out themselves. After that, he put his headphones back on. "Hello, baby. What did I forget at your place?" Joshua asked EPI. April explained that it was because she had left her homework notebook at his place. Joshua noticed the notebook right away and said he would tell Adrian to drop it off to EPI tomorrow morning. The girl replied that she hadn't finished all her assignments yet. Joshua asked with a smile, wondering if EPI wanted him to do her homework instead of her. He wondered why she couldn't ask her brother to do it. EPI emphasized that Adrian was definitely not going to help her with this. "So you figured I'd help you?" Joshua grinned even more, amazed at this girl's resourcefulness. April began to plead with the boy in a tearful voice, saying that he was the only one who could help her. She was worried that the teacher would just kill her tomorrow. Hearing the tearful voice, Joshua asked the girl to wake up tomorrow and stomp off to school. He promised to drop off her notebook by then. "No way!" EPI yelled into the receiver in a way that almost deafened Joshua. He asked in surprise what the problem was. The girl replied that she couldn't get up that early. Joshua was even more surprised and asked why EPI couldn't get up early when she had a good reason to do so. April's crying could be heard in the phone receiver again. She's really good at manipulation. Joshua suddenly stated that if this was the assignment EPI had been given by the teacher, then she should do it herself. He was well aware that she had forgotten her notebook. Joshua clarified, however, that it didn't excuse the fact that EPI was trying to shift her guilt onto others. April suddenly stopped crying. After waiting for EPI to calm down, Joshua said he'd wait for her tomorrow morning at the bus stop, and then he'd help her do her homework. He asked her to think of a better way to get the assignment done quickly. The girl understood, and asked Joshua not to tell her brother about it. "Not to tell your brother that you forgot your homework?" the boy asked with a sneer. "No problem," he added, and reminded EPI to remember to get up early tomorrow. After that, he wished the girl a good night. After that, Joshua hung up the phone. He picked up Epi's notebook and opened it curiously. Opening the notebook, Joshua realized that it was clearly not a homework notebook. The first page had the following written on it. "Stray dog, June 24th, 2009, Wednesday." The girl wrote that the weather wasn't good today. Clouds had lifted over the sky, and it looked like it was going to rain. Joshua realized it was Epi's diary, and all the entries were accompanied by pictures. April went on to write that as she was walking back home, picking her way through the thicket, she happened to see a black stray dog. "When I saw this dog, I was immediately upset, and it was because this dog looked like my brother," it said. EPI went on to say that the dog looked just like her brother and suggested that it might be his child. April jokingly suggested that the dog might be her brother's son. Joshua was stunned as he read the notes. His face literally froze in surprise. but still it could not convey the range of emotions he felt. When he comprehended what he had just read, he laughed loudly. He laughed so hard and loud that Adrian turned his attention to his neighbor. "It's morning." The alarm clock that EPI had specially set since the evening rang loudly, announcing that it was time to get up. The sleepy girl pulled a soft fox from the shelf and covered her ears with it so that she wouldn't hear that nasty sound and sleep a little longer. But the alarm clock kept ringing obnoxiously throughout the room. April had to get up involuntarily. She sat on the bed and looked at the toy in her hands with sleepy eyes. She suddenly remembered that Joshua had promised to wait for her this morning near the bus stop to help with her homework. Without wasting a second, EPI flashed out of bed and ran to get ready. Soon she was at the bus stop. Oh, how fast EPI ran, afraid she wouldn't make it in time. But only disappointment awaited the girl at the bus stop. April walked around the bus stop several times, but it was useless because no one was waiting for her, as promised. Suddenly, Epi's cell phone rang. The girl picked up the phone. It was Joshua calling. "Baby girl, are you here?" he asked. EPI replied that she was already waiting for him near the bus stop. April threatened Joshua that if he was late again, his girlfriend would be ugly and her body would look like a transformer. Barely had she said it when someone behind her poked something hard right into Epi's shoulder. The girl turned around in bewilderment. "Ugly? Transformer?" Joshua interjected with a smile, who was just coming up. "Little girl, do you have a conscience?" he asked, and handed the girl a bottle of milk. Joshua remarked that if this was about his future girlfriend, it sounded pretty interesting. He asked if those modifications shouldn't make her very pretty. "Will she look like you?" the boy asked EPI, lowering his gaze. April couldn't believe he was talking about her now. What's he implying? Joshua smiled and looked directly into Epi's eyes. He compared her to a girl named Miley Rouge. April came to resent such a comparison. She indignantly asked Joshua not to compare her to Miley, pointing out that Miley was far from pretty. Joshua countered that the name Miley itself sounded like it belonged to a hottie. He's messing with her again, it seems. EPI puffed up her cheeks resentfully. Joshua tried to ask if EPI had gotten off on the right foot today. He was only joking, after all. With those words, he tried again to give her the milk bottle. April fidgeted with the bottle, and Joshua wondered what was wrong. Doesn't EPI drink this stuff? But, the girl thought, she was actually allergic to dairy. But she didn't want to talk about it. The girl simply took the milk bottle from him and quickly tucked it into her backpack. Joshua remarked aloud that she was acting like a thief. "Actually, you gave it to me," the girl said rightly. "You also hid it. You're so heartless." Joshua continued to scoff. Okay, he suggested that EPI stop at the same store and finish her homework afterward. EPI and Joshua entered the store. It wasn't just a store, but something like a coffee shop. Joshua pulled out Epi's notebook and put it on the table. He decided to go get something to eat for breakfast. EPI was left alone at the table. The girl watched Joshua furtively, trying to do so without him noticing. The guy stopped in front of the fast food shelf and contemplated what to choose as breakfast. He can't seem to make up his mind. The girl behind the cash register looked at Joshua curiously, waiting for him to finally make his choice. EPI couldn't understand why he was standing there for so long either. "Babe, you want anything?" Joshua asked, and turned to EPI. The girl quickly turned away so he wouldn't notice she was looking at him. EPI just pretended to be diligently writing something. Joshua walked back to the table again. He sat back in his seat and opened his notebook and thought. "Bro, did you decide to take a break?" EPI asked. "Yep," he replied. April remembered the digits of the phone number that Joshua had called her from. If she remembered correctly, those were the digits that started the phone numbers of local callers. After thinking about it, the girl drew logical conclusions and asked Joshua if he lived nearby. He said he didn't. EPI then inquired if the boy would be coming home after the semester was over, and remarked that summer vacation was only a couple of weeks away. Joshua wasn't going home. He wanted to know why EPI was so curious about his life. With that question, he jabbed a finger at April's notebook. He asked her to finish up soon and stomp off to school already. The girl could not concentrate on her lessons. She tried to lift her gaze every now and then. Suddenly, Joshua gently flicked Epi's forehead. The girl shrieked in surprise. "Don't get distracted. Do your homework," EPI Joshua sternly admonished. April obediently set about the task. Time was inexorably moving forward. It was time to finish my homework. April finally told Joshua that she was done. "Then go to school," the boy said without taking his eyes off the book he was holding. The girl began to quickly gather her belongings into her backpack. Soon they were already outside. Joshua decided to walk the girl to school. As they approached the familiar school fence, April said they were here and thanked Joshua for today. The one looked at the girl in silence. "Wait," he said quietly to EPI while she was still gone. The girl turned around and looked at Joshua questioningly. He stepped closer and gently took April's hand, placing it in his own hand palm up. "This is for you," he said, and gave her some small paper folded several times. The girl stared at it, puzzled, not knowing what to do. What was this? Had Joshua written her a note? Joshua admitted to EPI that he had looked in her notebook. He revealed that he had read what was written there, so he decided to make up for it somehow. The school corridor was lively. The children were scurrying about, going about their business. April's classmates began to gather in the classroom and discuss something before class. April didn't care about that at all. She was thinking about what had happened this morning. EPI was uneasy about the piece of paper Joshua handed her. She took it out and twirled it in her hands, puzzledly. The sheet had her name written on it. April unfolded this little square, which turned into a whole sheet of notebook paper afterward. "Oh, that looks like a leaf torn from Joshua's journal. It had the following written on it: 'Help your brother move to Han.'" This page began with a prologue in which Joshua wrote about the weather and how he had heard from his mom that his brother was moving to another campus. He went on to write that after graduating from high school, he went to the university in his neighborhood to help his brother. As it turned out, his university was 5 minutes away from the dormitory. Joshua confessed that when he found out about it, the event that was supposed to be held there had been moved to his brother's university. April laughed at the content of this page. This act of Joshua's deserved respect and overrode the annoyance of reading her diary. "Ah, love does wonders to hearts. It stirs the soul and lights fires in the eyes. A fiery feeling, once settled in the heart, only grows and floods everything around with its warmth. It's a feeling that points a shortcut to happiness and reveals the full essence of life." A little while later, April came home from class. Time was dragging very slowly for April. Even the parents began to notice some changes in their daughter's behavior. April spent most of her time walking around sad and pensive. Her thoughts were preoccupied with Joshua and wondering when she would see him again. EPI saved that sheet from Joshua's journal, placing it in a glass bottle. The girl wanted the unreal. She hoped she could grow up just a little bit as fast as possible. She sadly counted the days in hopes that they too would pass as quickly as possible. Summer vacation has arrived. Warmth and freedom. That's what any schoolboy or student would definitely be happy about. Even on vacations, kids like EPI had homework. One day, EPI stayed home with her brother. "I'm going to step away for a bit, and you stay home and finish your homework," Adrian asked as he put on his shirt. "No way," EPI replied, short and emphatic. Adrian wondered if his sister would even let him go out. The girl reminded her brother that Mom and Dad wouldn't be back for a while. She could be hungry, and there was nothing to eat at home. Adrian indignantly pointed out that when he was the same age as EPI and his parents weren't home, not only did he make his own food, but he looked after himself. EPI stated that she and her brother were completely different. Thoth asked and what that difference was. "You didn't have an older brother, but I do," EPI parried, smiling. Adrian fell silent. After a little thought, he said he didn't have time to coddle her anymore. He asked what she wanted to eat, promising to buy it for her. Her brother added that she had a second option, to sit and suffer, and then die a hungry death. April looked at her brother indifferently. Then she quickly picked up her phone and started clicking buttons as if dialing a phone number. She looked so serious that any actress would have believed her acting. "Dad!" EPI said loudly, putting the phone to her ear. "My brother said I have to die!" she added just as loudly. And Adrian turned sharply, reached EPI, and snatched the phone from her with lightning speed. He looked at the display and found that the call history was empty. That meant that April hadn't called anyone, but had just skillfully put on a show. "You wicked devil, are you kidding me?" his brother yelled angrily. April replied calmly that she was just practicing, but she could call for real. Adrian tossed her phone back to her. He said April could call if she wanted to, but he threatened that if she did, she would surely feel the wrath of the righteous. With those words, he took a dusting brush from the shelf. April quieted down a bit, but it was not her style to remain silent, and she shouted that her brother would not dare hit her. She threatened that her father would kill him for it when he got home. Adrian looked coldly at his sister and tapped that fluffy brush on his arm. He declared that he might as well slap her while her father was away. "Little one, do you want me to come up here? Or will you deign to come up yourself?" He addressed EPI menacingly. The girl was no longer in the mood for jokes at this point. Adrian could be persuasive, too. The boy looked at his sister expectantly. "Fine, I'll come over myself," he said, and with a confident stride, he headed towards EPI. His sister jumped up on the couch and squealed, "Bro, it's my fault, my bad." Adrian walked as close to the couch as possible and stopped. EPI felt the gravity of the situation and apologized to her brother, promising it wouldn't happen again. "Good timing," my brother remarked. Adrian wondered why it was so hard for EPI to be a goody-goody before. He promised to bring his sister goodies every day if she would stop crossing him. The girl had no choice but to agree. He told his sister to call if anything happened, and asked her not to open the door to anyone. He told his sister to call if anything happened, and asked her not to open the door to anyone. The door slammed loudly behind Adrian. How angry EPI was at him right now. She really didn't like it when things didn't go her way. Did he say he was going out with friends? I wonder if Joshua will be among them. What if he's going out of his way to meet just him? Left alone with her thoughts, April went to her room. She headed to the bookcase to pull out one cherished box. With trepidation in her soul, she took out this box and opened it. Oh, this was where the iconic milk bottle that Joshua had once thoughtfully brought her was kept. And he never knew she was allergic to milk and never drank it. But she kept the bottle as a memento. As she was pulling out this box, her cell phone rang in her pocket. Lily's on the phone. I wonder what she wants. Distracted from her secret bottle box, April answered the phone. A friend called April to let her know that next Tuesday was Kevin's birthday, and he was suggesting that everyone get together for karaoke. Lily asked if April was going and suggested that she go together and buy him a gift. EPI admitted that she didn't have the money to buy him a present, and she was busy. Thinking her friend was just kidding, Lily reminded her that they were actually on summer vacation now. She started asking EPI to buy something together, figuring that if she came empty-handed, it would be very awkward. The girl replied that it was logical, so that's why she's just not coming. What's wrong with that? Lily admitted that she had already said that they would give one gift from both of them anyway. April didn't seem to be listening to her friend at all. She looked puzzled at the bottle and shook the stars that were inside it. Among those stars was the folded page from Joshua's journal. April counted the days since they'd met, throwing one star in the bottle each day. Her friend was on the phone, trying to shout to April. She assured her that she had to go with her. Moreover, she had to. Lily's words sounded like background noise to April at that moment. Her mind was on something else entirely. And it was a guy named Joshua. Since the day he had helped her with her homework, she had not seen him again. Freeing herself from thoughts of Joshua, April picked up her phone. In the phone book, she found that cherished number, signed as Joshua Audley. What should he write? How about a national holiday? It's the only thing they've celebrated recently. Happy Founding Day of the People's Army, was the text April entered into the message box. Oh no, this is all very silly. It was strange to congratulate a guy like Joshua on such a holiday after such a long break in communication. No, that's not it! With these thoughts, the girl wrote and deleted, and then wrote and deleted her drafts again. Why don't you text him first and then tell him you got the wrong number? No, that doesn't make sense. Or should I pretend that I accidentally called him? April threw her phone on the bed in frustration. God, what does she do? Joshua bullied her all the time. Plus, he's much older and they don't even have anything to talk about. What is April doing wasting her time anyway? She should have gone to bed. The girl rolled from side to side, not knowing what to do. Thinking about Joshua was driving her crazy. Her mood was changing at the speed of light. In a moment, she was already thinking about why she wanted Joshua Audley in the first place. April is sure he's a very special person. He's handsome, and he's probably got everyone staring at him. Definitely a guy like Joshua can't go unnoticed. In April's opinion, he's like a beautiful dog, the kind you want to touch. But really it just proves that falling in love is fleeting. Yes, it is. With those thoughts, April opened her phone and started deleting all her messages, even thinking about deleting his number. The girl thought that not seeing him would stop her from thinking about him so much. Suddenly, Adrian called. The phone vibrated so suddenly that April missed it right on her face out of surprise. God, what a bad time to call him! April now had an abrasion right on her nose. Annoyed by the unexpected injury, she yelled into her brother's phone. "What do you want?" she wailed so loudly that Brother Adrian nearly went deaf. The boy asked EPI why she was yelling like a crazy person. The girl, in turn, asked her brother what was wrong and why he was calling. Adrian explained that he wouldn't be able to make it to dinner and said April could come to his place if she wanted. He added that he wouldn't be able to drop off the food either. He also asked his sister to call Joshua so that he could come too, noting that he was in class right now. Oh my God, this was so lucky! April was mentally overjoyed, and she told her brother that she would definitely come to see him. Evening came. April was already in the car with her older brother and his friend Bob. He asked Adrian to drive a little farther, noting that Joshua had said he'd be at the stop near the East Plaza. "Oh, there he is," the bean of a comrade remarked. April quickly looked out the window to make sure Joshua was really there. He walked leisurely toward the car, and the girl, sitting in the back seat, watched his every move. God, it had been so long since they'd seen each other. Barely had Joshua opened the door as April immediately turned the other way. "Have you been tutoring high school kids?" Bob asked Joshua. "Yeah," he replied briefly. You a way to look at Joshua without arousing suspicion. She could watch him safely through the driver's rearview mirror. I wish no one would notice the way she was looking at him. Thankfully, no one in the car paid absolutely no attention to her looks. April noticed Joshua's eyes closing tiredly. He looks very tired. It seemed like riding in the car would only lull this guy to sleep. His eyes were closing as he drove. But with his side vision, Joshua saw April's disgruntled face. "Little girl, why aren't we saying hello?" Joshua asked, turning to April. "Big brother," the girl said. Joshua didn't understand what she meant and asked her what big brother meant. April was only trying to say that it was her older brother's fault that she hadn't said hello. But she couldn't express her thoughts, and she kept slurring her words. Once again, Joshua didn't understand what she was trying to say. "Big brother's handsome, isn't he?" he asked, smiling, clearly referring to himself. Joshua said it wasn't surprising, noting that April blushed like a tomato at the sight of him. "Who said you were handsome?" EPI flashed like a match. "What's true is true," Bob turned to state. He wondered how shameless he had to be to make April blush. Adrian also sarcastically pointed out that Joshua had always been like that. Bob said that one day when he was running a kilometer race and was panting like hell, Joshua came up to him and asked him why he blushed when he saw him. Adrian, for his part, remarked that not only was he like this with people, but he behaved the same way with dogs. Then the boys turned it into a joke and laughed merrily. Joshua was indifferently silent. He didn't care about their flat jokes. April, meanwhile, was vividly picturing Joshua treating her like a dog. So she's like a tame animal to him? That old dog Joshua! April mentally resented him. Bob turned and asked the girl to ignore the worthless man. Joshua was getting tired of hearing this, and he asked his comrade why he was making this misunderstanding between them. "Misunderstanding? Baby, am I trying to do that?" Bob turned to April. "No," she replied, noticing that this little brother really didn't seem like a nice person. Joshua wondered if she had called him a bad person. April looked away resentfully. Got it. I'm not a good person. Joshua sighed, calling April an ungrateful little child. In the meantime, they had arrived. Adrian dropped everyone off and said he had to park the car. Bob asked Joshua if he wanted to have a drink. He replied that he didn't drink. April suddenly felt her stomach ache. Joshua and Bob walked a little ahead. When Joshua noticed that their companion was lagging behind, he turned and asked her to go faster. He might not even notice if someone stole her. "Big brother, I need to go to the bathroom," the girl said quietly. Joshua looked worriedly at EPI. He noticed that she was very pale and asked the girl if her stomach hurt. She just nodded silently. Joshua asked Bob to take their table, saying that he would take EPI to the bathroom. April quickly perked up at his words and began assuring Joshua that she would be fine. Joshua realized that the girl wanted him to let her go alone, but he was afraid she'd get lost, and then he'd have to explain it to her brother. April reminded her that she had her phone with her, and it was just a restroom, so no need to get so worked up. They finally found a restroom. What would be waiting outside? April sped off at a brisk pace to do her business. Upon entering the ladies' room, April realized that the sensation felt very unusual. She had never felt so lousy. "That something's not right here," April thought and looked under her dress. Oh God, no, not this, not now. Sitting on the toilet, April suddenly remembered that she and her mother had had a very interesting conversation not long ago. Oh, she'd been reading her favorite book and eating chips, not realizing how timely it was that her mother had brought it up. That day, my mom delicately started a conversation about EPI being just the right age when her period should normally start. EPI was privy to some details that her mom thinks every girl her age just needs to know. The mom talked about such a useful thing as pads, and also about how to use them properly and which ones are the best to choose. Oh, EPI was even given a visual demonstration of how to do it. Lastly, Mom wondered if April understood what they were trying to explain to her. Of course, EPI understood perfectly. Taking care of her daughter, the mother also put some pads in Epi's backpack in case her period started suddenly outside the house. The woman also asked EPI not to panic, assuring her that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. "It's perfectly normal to get your period. Don't worry." She patted the girl's head. And now, sitting in the bathroom, April thought with horror that all she had brought with her was her cell phone. Oh, why did they start today? With annoyance, the girl also found that her dress with a stain. That's how it is. In such circumstances, EPI couldn't think of anything better to do than to unwind a long strip of toilet paper and fold it into several layers. Yes, in her opinion, such a thing could be used instead of a pad for a while. Good thing I wore black shorts today. If I don't look closely, no one will see it, will they? She thought, trying to find comfort in something. April came out of the bathroom, confused and embarrassed, and Joshua was waiting for her. She walked toward him with a shy, timid gait, not in any particular hurry. "Finished?" Joshua inquired. He could tell from the look on Epi's face that something was wrong. "Joshua, go first. I want to wait for my brother so I can go up with him," April asked, trying not to make eye contact with the boy. However, Joshua replied that her brother had been at the coffee shop for a while. April lowered her head doomfully. In that case, she just had to agree to go to the joint. She walked forward a little, thinking angrily about why all of this had to happen today. The girl's condition couldn't go unnoticed. Joshua looked at April and couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Suddenly, by chance, his gaze stopped on the girl's dress. As April walked forward, Joshua immediately noticed a red stain on the back of the garment. Oh, so that's it! Now the reason became clear to Joshua. He felt a little embarrassed. The feeling was fleeting, however, as he realized that April was feeling much worse. He walked slowly behind, thinking about what to do in this situation. The guy clearly understood that he could not remain indifferent to it, and that he had to help the girl. "It wasn't diarrhea, was it?" he asked, catching up to EPI and taking her hand. It was a surprise to April. She stopped and looked at Joshua fearfully. The girl lowered her gaze in embarrassment and pressed her lips together. Oh, how embarrassed she was at this moment. Her eyes glistened and filled with tears. Rubbing his neck thoughtfully, Joshua suggested that April go back to the restroom and he could go and get what she needed in the meantime. April cried. Tears rolled from her large, beautiful eyes in clear peas. Joshua looked at the girl in confusion. He wasn't used to being in this situation himself. "So why are we roaring?" he asked, leaning over to EPI and gently wiping away her tears. Joshua sat down next to the girl and tried his best to calm her down. The guy assured EPI that nothing bad had happened, and she shouldn't be so worried. He once again asked EPI to go and wait for him in the restroom. In a quiet voice, April thanked Joshua, mentally amazed at his understanding. She left, and Joshua was left standing alone, waiting for the girl to disappear out the door. And as soon as April left, he immediately pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. Joshua decided that the right thing to do in this situation was to call Adrian. Adrian answered the call in a disgruntled voice and immediately pounced on Joshua, asking where they'd been for so long. He noticed that the food had arrived. Joshua didn't know how to start talking about it properly. He couldn't get his act together. Finally, he decided to say that Adrian's sister had some problems. There was an awkward pause on the other end of the phone. Joshua told Adrian that his sister seemed to be on her period. Those words seemed to add to the awkwardness. There was silence. Adrian didn't know what to say, and Joshua didn't know what else to say. The first to break the silence was Adrian. "And now what?" he asked. That reaction surprised Joshua. "Are you asking me that? Is she already my sister or something?" he asked in bewilderment. "We're brothers. My sister is your sister too," Adrian stated manipulatively, without the slightest hesitation. Adrian then pointed out that there was a supermarket on the second floor and asked if Joshua couldn't just buy her some underwear there. Joshua just froze in a stupor with his mouth open. That's how his friend knew how to solve problems, dumping them entirely on someone else. But Joshua wasn't the type to let himself be manipulated so easily. He suggested that Adrian go downstairs and buy what he needed. Joshua emphasized that he didn't think it would be appropriate for him to buy something like that for April. Adrian, on the other hand, was completely impenetrable. "Dude, that's not cool at all," was all he could reply. Hanging up. Adrian added, and Joshua's phone beeped, letting him know that his caller had disconnected. Just like that, Joshua was left alone with a problem that clearly wasn't his to solve. For a few seconds, he stared doomfully into his phone. Now only he understood why his friend's younger sister thought her older brother was a complete man. Yeah, there was a reason for that. Surprisingly, however, Adrian did make it to the supermarket and found Joshua there. Now both boys were standing at a large rack with a huge assortment of pads. There was a wide selection for every taste, size, and wallet. What does daytime even mean? Like, you can only wear these during the day? Adrian asked, perplexed, looking at one package. He then pointed out that it was nighttime after all, which meant that EPI needed the ones that said nighttime. Joshua, for his part, was puzzled by one package too. He wondered aloud if the 40 centimeters indicated on the package might be too long for April. Both guys stood at the shelf with pads and looked confused, but also as concentrated as possible at the same time. There were many nuances that they were not prepared to face. The guys did not understand which ones were better to choose: cotton, dry, or breathable strips. While Joshua and Adrian were concentrating on the inscriptions on the packages, a sales assistant stealthily approached them. "Young men, do you need help?" she asked with a smile. The guys were confused with surprise. In addition, it was noticeable that some of the visitors were murmuring when they looked at the guys standing at the shelf with women's products. While Joshua was silent, Adrian had already thought of what he was going to say. Of course, he didn't want to be the object of gossip, so he decided to turn the tables on his friend. "That guy is actually a woman!" Adrian blurted out the first thing that popped into his head and pointed at Joshua standing next to him. Joshua was literally stunned for the first few seconds by what Adrian had said. The girl counselor was equally taken aback. They looked at Adrian in bewilderment, waiting for an explanation. Don't let his appearance mislead you. He really is a woman. Adrian continued his stupid jokes, hugging his friend. Just at that moment, Joshua had a great idea to get back at Adrian for his stupid prank. He smiled and glanced conspiratorially at his comrade. Adrian sensed something wrong, and as it turned out, for good reason. For in the next second, Joshua leaned down to Adrian's very ear and said, "Baby." He did it so that he could be heard. Adrian shuddered in surprise, and goosebumps ran up and down his body. Haha, that's a turn of events Joker Adrian certainly didn't expect from Joshua. Adrian wanted to say something, to get out of the awkward position his friend had put him in, but Joshua didn't let him. The boy said that there was no need to go into details, since everyone had already understood. "Everyone realized that I'm the best in your heart," Joshua added in a theatrical voice. Everyone around them gasped at the sight, and Adrian was the only one who wanted to fall through the ground. Adrian grabbed the first pads off the shelf without reading or looking at the specs and raced for the exit. "Baby, wait for me!" yelled back to his friend Joshua, who was just getting into character. Soon they came out of the supermarket. Stepping aside, Adrian grudgingly remarked that it was just disgusting and that he almost threw up. "Didn't you say I was a woman?" grinned Joshua wryly. "If I were a woman," Joshua stretched out and wondered. For a moment, the guy imagined what he would look like as a woman. Joshua thought, he would look just fine. But Joshua jokingly asked if he would be a hottie in a woman's body, in his friend's opinion. Adrian began to boil over. He didn't want to be here for another second, so he suggested that Joshua leave as soon as possible. Joshua, however, stopped his friend and remarked that they still needed to get some clothes for April. Adrian grimaced unhappily. "Her clothes are soiled too?" he asked with an indignant frown. Joshua only nodded in response, and Adrian visibly grimaced. Well, as the older brother, he had to be involved in solving his little sister's problems, since she was here with them. Soon the guys were all ready near the restroom when they saw the girl walking towards the restroom. Adrian called out to her. The boy asked if she could give the package to a girl named April. The stranger kindly agreed to comply with the guy's request. "Can I ask you something else?" Joshua also asked. "That girl is still very young and doesn't quite know what's happening to her. Could you please give her some pointers? She's too shy to ask for help on her own," he added. The stranger was a little confused, but still listened to both guys' requests. "No problem," she agreed with a smile after a brief pause, and both companions breathed a sigh of relief. April had been standing in the restroom all this time. Her mood was irrevocably ruined. "Young lady, you're April, aren't you?" The unexpectedly unfamiliar girl addressed her. Handing April the package, the girl noticed that her brother had asked her to give it to her. She also asked if April knew how to use it. April replied that she knew everything and thanked the girl profusely. The stranger noticed some confusion and embarrassment and tried to comfort the girl, saying that everything was fine and it could happen to anyone. "When I was my age, I always got my clothes dirty. There's nothing wrong with that. It's all fixable," the girl added and smiled sweetly. The stranger's help and her albeit small support were just right for April. The girl expressed her gratitude from the bottom of her heart. Coming out of the restroom, EPI met her older brother. April looked tearful and puzzled. She hesitated to look at her brother. "Honey, what are we roaring about?" Adrian asked as if nothing had happened. April replied that the whole situation was embarrassing. "What's there to be embarrassed about?" her brother asked, perplexed. EPI cried again, trying to explain through her tears that she was embarrassed. EPI then went from words to aggression. She angrily remarked that they had put everything in a transparent bag, and everyone could see what was inside. "What bag they gave you? They put it in. What's my fault?" Adrian turned away. He then snatched the package out of Epi's hands and offered to carry that instead. "I'll look like a clown instead of you, okay?" He addressed his sister reproachfully. Tears once again couldn't keep from welling up in Epi's eyes. Adrian was creepily annoyed that she was crying and wiping herself with his shirt. "That's disgusting! Didn't you say you're not a baby anymore?" Adrian was indignant, rebuking EPI for still crying over nonsense. But the girl assured him that she was only wiping tears, not snot, on his shirt. Finally, Adrian cooled down a bit. He stroked his sister's head and motioned for her to go. He promised to buy April something delicious. April had calmed down a little, too, but she still had a lot to think about. Finally, the brother and sister returned to the cafe. "What took you so long?" asked Bob indignantly as soon as he saw Adrian. He explained that she had gone to get toys, and when she didn't get any, she had cried. "It's okay. Once we eat, I'll get you one," Bob promised, not even realizing that the reason for their delay was something else entirely. April didn't care what Bob said. She'd been thinking about Joshua the whole time. The girl looked up. "Oh, this is embarrassing!" April and Joshua's eyes met. EPI was the first one who couldn't take it. She was so embarrassed that she looked away sharply. Suddenly, someone put a glass of water in front of EPI. The girl was surprised to see who had done it. Of course it was Joshua. He suggested that EPI drink some hot water. How thoughtful of him. April had mixed feelings at that moment. She thanked Joshua and drank some water. It seemed like it was just them, and no one else at the table at that moment. Everyone at the table was enjoying their food. "Baby, have some more of that drink," Joshua offered with an affectionate smile. Bob looked at his friend in surprise. Adrian was ready to fall through the ground. He and Joshua were the only people at the table who understood the meaning of the joke. Joshua had jokingly called Adrian baby. April looked at her brother in a stupor. She couldn't understand why his face had changed so much. There was noise and clamor in the cafe hall. The evening atmosphere relaxed the visitors. Adrian placed the menu in front of his sister and suggested she order what she would like. EPI looked thoughtfully at the list of dishes on offer. Taking a pencil in her hand, the girl already knew what she would like to eat right now. She chose the beef kebab. Adrian asked the girl to have a conscience and reminded her that she wasn't allowed that kind of thing. "I'll just take one bite," EPI pleaded. But Adrian was adamant and replied that she couldn't have a single piece. Bob wondered in surprise why the friend wouldn't let his sister eat what she wanted. "Malaya, order it. I'll pay for it," Bob interjected. But Adrian gave his friend a sullen look and told him to shut up, emphasizing that EPI was allergic to lamb and beef. Better not order it. You don't want to get sick later, do you?" Bob sighed. But EPI stood her ground. She didn't think a small bite would do anything. April, stubborn, ordered the beef dish after all. Soon, the flavorful meat and noodles were on the table in front of her. April's eyes lit up. She was already excited to finally have a delicious dinner. I guess the fact that she wasn't allowed to eat beef made her crave it even more. Meanwhile, Bob began to offer Joshua a drink, reasoning that Adrian shouldn't be drinking anyway, since he was driving. "I don't drink," Joshua replied succinctly. EPI, on the other hand, was secretly watching her brother so he wouldn't accidentally give in to temptation. Realizing that Adrian wasn't going to drink, EPI decided to finally get down to her delicious meal. She took the chopsticks in her hand and prepared to start her meal. Oh yes, now that piece of juicy beef hidden inside the noodles. April would love to send it into her mouth, but it wasn't to be. Just as she was about to eat her meat, suddenly someone put an empty plate in front of her. "Babe, would you put a little brother down for starters?" Joshua asked with a smile. April froze in a stupor, but still, why not share? The girl put her piece in Joshua's plate. "That's it?" The boy stretched out resentfully. He remarked that he should probably do it himself, and reached for Epi's plate with his wands. April just watched dumbfounded as the pieces of succulent beef she'd been craving moved one by one into Joshua's plate. Oh, what's he doing? The guy got the job done very quickly and soon had April's dish back, but only with just the noodles. "Great, and you can keep this one," he said contentedly. "You like beef that much?" asked EPI in shock. Though she literally wanted to scream with indignation that she was now completely without a single piece of meat herself. Yeah, April was really mad at Joshua. Oh, now she'd have to eat only noodles. Joshua grinned at the girl and mentally concluded that she looked like a fugu fish. Dinner came to an end, and the guys all walked out of the cafe in a friendly manner. "We are in our 3rd year of school. I've been friends with you guys for 3 years. Why am I still single?" a tipsy Bob yelled, hanging onto Joshua's shoulder. Adrian asked his friend not to yell like a chopped chicken and suggested that he'd rather yell after graduation. But a flushed Bob continued to resent it. He whined that he was sick of everything. Besides, the guy was offended by the fact that all the girls who approached him in all those 3 years, they either asked for Adrian's number or Joshua's number. "Why don't you give your number next time and say you're Adrian?" Adrian asked. Joshua added that he could also safely spin such a feint with him. A wave of gratitude came over the tipsy Bob. He couldn't help himself and hugged both friends at once. "Brothers! Hey, what good friends you are!" Bob couldn't contain his emotions. EPI only watched it all from the sidelines with disdain. Adrian left his friends to wait while he brought the wheelbarrow closer. Bob, Joshua, and EPI sat down on the bench. Bob leaned back and hiccuped loudly. Suddenly, Joshua turned to April and asked if she had some change. He asked her to give him some. The girl wondered with surprise why he was asking her for money. Joshua's eloquent look was the best answer to Epi's question. The girl followed his gaze, realized he was looking at the toy machine. What was he up to? Soon EPI stood at the machine and breathlessly watched the toy bunny move to a special hole. How the girl wanted to win this toy. But alas, Joshua's game was hopeless. Unfortunately, he wasted all his attempts and won nothing. The guy asked if April had any more change. The girl opened her purse and noticed that it was his 6th attempt. But this time, Joshua got lucky, and so a little toy rabbit fell into the prize drawer. "Wow, finally!" "Look, isn't your brother great?" Joshua turned to EPI, squatting down to retrieve a toy. April remarked that Joshua had had so many attempts that it would have been easier to buy the same toy at the store. Joshua admitted that it was his first time. "You didn't like him? Don't you want to take him back?" he asked, a little frustrated. Without thinking, April snatched the stuffed bunny out of the guy's hands. Of course she needed it. It was a lot of money to get that toy. "Thank you, little brother." EPI thanked Joshua sweetly. She was overjoyed, actually. Because he had done that especially for her. "I got you a toy, so don't cry anymore, okay?" he asked the girl and stroked her head gently. April stiffened. Some of the thoughts were very disturbing to the girl. She realized that Joshua probably knew what she was crying about. She also guessed that he had to pretend like he didn't know it was because of that awkward situation. Realizing this made April feel awkward again. She buried her face in the stuffed bunny to hide her flushed cheeks. Joshua looked at the girl and smiled affectionately. "Stubborn little kid," he said, and stroked Epi's head again. When they got home, Adrian made tea for April. He sternly ordered her to drink it all. With those words, Adrian set the cup on the table and stared at his sister. Taking a small sip, EPI admitted to her brother that she had found out about the girls asking for his number. The girl was very curious to know what happened after they had gotten it. Adrian replied that there was no after anything. Good thing it wasn't. EPI sighed and blew on her hot tea. April was pretty sure that when she looked for a number, just to get in touch with the guys in some way, Bob would pick up the phone instead, and then they'd get beaten up for it. Whatever relationship she had with her brother, she still worried about him. So the girl asked Adrian not to let others bully her. The boy, on the other hand, was doomed to look somewhere off to the side and think about something of his own. Oh, he just wanted to take the money and get out. April had 2 toys on the shelf in her room now. Joshua the old fox and her new plush bunny. Now this couple was so contrasting together. These toys were so different, but they definitely reminded her of someone. "Scarecrow," April whispered quietly, glancing at the fox. Just at that moment, her mother entered the room with a plate in her hand. She looked at EPI worriedly and asked if she was still unwell. The girl admitted that it was quite unpleasant. "Our EPI is growing up." Her mom smiled and told her that she knew a story from her aunt that when her cousin got her period, she got taller. That story perked April up a bit. The girl cheerfully declared that in that case, she would be fine, even if it was unpleasant. April immediately remembered how she'd felt when she'd been around the tall and mature Joshua. She'd been so small compared to him. Ah, that must be why he treated her like a little girl. "I want to get taller!" EPI whispered excitedly. A few days later, April came out of the house. "Ah, the weather is just wonderful today. It's sunny and the birds are singing their songs, making everyone happy." April wasn't feeling very happy, though. Oh, did she really have to go to Kevin Wilker's birthday party? By the way, her mom had enrolled April in summer school, and now she finally had some free time. April was only going to this event because of her friend Nora. She was the one who talked her friend into coming. According to her, Kevin asks her every day if April is coming or not. In fact, Nora admitted that it was all because of her. April wondered what her friend was talking about. "He likes you," Nora admitted with a smile. EPI rounded her eyes in surprise. "Who told you that? You're informing me you are, not him." EPI started to get indignant. Nora, however, replied that people have eyes, and you can tell everything by Kevin anyway. "Our classrooms aren't even on the same floor, but he comes to see us every day and always asks me about you," the girl remarked. Between conversations, Nora had already picked out a gift and asked the salesman to wrap it. "Right here," EPI said suddenly, and poked herself in the cheek with her finger. "What?" Nora asked, bewildered. "Don't tell me you want me to kiss you," she added. But EPI clarified that she'd pointed to her cheek to let Nora know that that was where Kevin had hit her with his fist when she'd fought him. Nora shrieked in horror. She hadn't expected to hear that about Kevin. Now she wanted to know when it had happened. EPI answered that it was when they were in second grade, and Kevin treated her like a boyfriend. The girl also admitted that she then didn't have time to orient herself when Kevin tried to hit her and ended up falling. Nora was just shocked and couldn't believe her friend was saying this seriously. "It's okay, he just knocked my tooth out. But I was really mad at that point, so I pushed him," April added, recalling that epic fight. "He knocked out a tooth, and afterward you say it's all right?" wondered Nora. But EPI reiterated that everything was fine, adding that Kevin had also slipped and fractured himself then. There was silence between the girlfriends for a while. Soon the girls came out of the gift store. "It's hot, and it's only morning," Nora sighed. The girls were just passing by a cafe, and they thought they'd stop in. As soon as the door opened, EPI immediately flinched when she saw a familiar silhouette. Oh my God! There was someone who looked like Joshua standing there. Or was it him? Nora was already happy with the mere fact that the place was air-conditioned. "Welcome." The guy said hello without raising his head when he heard the door open. "Oh, it really is Joshua!" April froze at the surprise. It was lucky to meet him here. "Looks like Joshua works here." "Bro!" EPI exclaimed without hiding her surprise. The boy looked at the girl and asked if she was out for a walk. "Yep, bro, do you work here?" April inquired in turn. And Joshua confirmed the girl's speculation by replying that he did indeed work at the establishment. While EPI talked to Joshua, Nora sat down at a table and asked her friend to order her a double scoop of ice cream. "Bro, can I have a mango-flavored ice cream, double portion?" the girl asked. Then she added that the ice cream had to have coconut shavings and put the money on the counter. Joshua swept up. She paid a couple yuan less. "What? Ice cream costs 18 yuan, coconut shavings 16 yuan. That makes a total of 34 yuan. EPI said surprised, and asked if Joshua meant to say she couldn't count. "You're going to be watching me, aren't you? I have to have some kind of benefit from it. If I don't charge extra, it will be a loss to me," Joshua replied, smiling. When EPI went back to her friend's table, Nora immediately asked who it was. The girl pointed out that Epi's brother didn't seem to look the same. April explained that it was her brother's friend, and then Nora got carried away. She kept raving about how handsome this guy was. Also, in Nora's opinion, Epi's brother is pretty good-looking, too. "April, you're so lucky," Nora remarked enthusiastically. "Cut the crap. My brother is much uglier," EPI replied dryly. Back to the moment when EPI was standing at the counter and Joshua said she had underpaid. Ah, the girl took it seriously and imagined having to say goodbye to her hard-earned change. It's a robbery, declared April after a brief pause. Joshua asked with a smile, wondering if he would be a fraud by demanding an extra yuan from EPI. But the annoyed EPI sharply turned away from the boy and flatly declared that she wouldn't even look at him. Wait! Joshua called out to her and managed to grab her arm across the counter. The girl turned and watched in amazement as Joshua put all her money back in her hand. How can I take money from you? The boy wondered, and with a smile suggested she'd rather keep the change for candy. After that, Joshua went to work, and April stood at the counter for a while, completely confused with the money in her hand. Why does it have to be like this? It's a strange behavior to give the carrot right after the stick. After a moment's thought, April spoke to Joshua again. She asked Joshua with a worried look, wondering if Joshua didn't have any money. He stared at her questioningly, not sure what she meant. April explained that the last time she'd seen him, Bob had told her that Joshua was tutoring. Now, on top of that, EPI had also learned that he was working at the coffee shop. "Aren't you going home for summer vacation?" she asked. The guy lowered his gaze and admitted that he was indeed a little short of money. Soon, April's order was ready. Joshua put 2 ice cream dishes on the tray and motioned for EPI to go, letting her know that her friend must be waiting. Well, April took the order and went to Nora's table. Barely had the girl placed the tray on the table when her friend immediately asked in surprise if Epi's brother's friend had paid for them. "Uh-huh," April confirmed. "Ah, that's good!" exclaimed Nora joyfully. She was glad that she had enough money left over to fund the game. April remarked in a tedious voice that her friend was already donating too much to that game. Nora didn't see a problem with that, however. Soon both girls had finished their delicious ice cream, and Nora asked if it was time for them to move out. Kevin and the others were probably already there. EPI was fine with that. "Going to karaoke?" asked Joshua, seeing that the girls were about to leave. April nodded her head silently. "If you go out alone, be sure to go home before dark. Don't stay out there too long," the boy carefully recommended. Nora thoughtfully noted that Epi's brother's friend spoke just like her father. "That's right. Mine is the same," EPI replied. The girls, satiated and rested from the heat, walked out of the cafe. As soon as the door closed behind them, Joshua went straight to their table to clear away the dishes. Oh, I think what he saw surprised the guy quite a bit. Under one plate were the very bills and coins April was going to pay. Joshua sighed and was stunned for a moment. I immediately remembered April's concerned face when she'd asked if Joshua had any money. Sweet little girl. Joshua smiled as he looked at the money. He wondered what EPI was doing with it. Then the smile slowly faded from his face, and his heart filled with a slightly different feeling. Somehow Joshua suddenly felt sad. He hesitated and flipped one coin upward with his finger. Joshua couldn't understand what was wrong with him. Somehow he felt a sense of guilt. He felt as if he'd bilked a child out of money. April and her friend were already at karaoke. EPI sat at the table next to Kevin. He was wearing the birthday crown, but it was hard to tell he was in a good mood. The music was playing, and Kevin's friends were humming into microphones, torturing the other customers with their voices. Nora glanced at her friend and asked if she was going to order something to drink. EPI couldn't do that even if she wanted to. She'd already spent all her money at Joshua's, and she didn't have any extra. "No, thank you. It's 5 o'clock. I want to go home." Through the shrieks, squeaks, and squeals, her friend couldn't hear Epi's words properly. So Nora interjected what she'd said. "I said I want to go home already," repeated EPI in a loud voice, pausing distinctly after each word. Nora literally shuddered at the sudden outcry of her friend. The music stopped playing just as EPI was answering. There was silence for a moment, and everyone stared at April in amazement. "You're leaving already?" Kevin asked, surprised. April explained that it was time for her to leave, since her father had told her to get home before dark. Kevin jumped up from his seat and volunteered to walk April to the bus stop. Kevin jumped up from his seat and volunteered to walk April to the bus stop. "I'm leaving," she said calmly and headed for the exit. Everyone saw her off with surprised looks. Of course, April could feel the stares, and she suddenly felt uncomfortable. She realized she had one last thing to say. Already at the door, EPI turned and wished Kevin a happy birthday. Only now she felt a sense of accomplishment. There was sadness and disappointment in Kevin's eyes. It looked like he had hoped EPI would be here longer on a day like this. But his hopes were shattered by this girl's heart of stone. "Wait!" he shouted in April's wake. As she walked down the escalator, EPI noticed that Kevin had followed her after all. "Why are you following me?" she asked. The guy replied that he wasn't following her, but just wanted to get some fresh air and see EPI off. The girl was puzzled to ask why he would do that, noting that it was only a short walk. She asked Kevin to go back. "April, you can ignore me, but I'm still going to walk you out," Kevin replied in desperation. That kind of pressure puzzled the girl. She was thinking more and more about her friend Nora's words. "You're not in love with me, are you?" She decided to ask Kevin the question right up front. The guy was taken aback and wondered why EPI thought that. The girl looked at Kevin questioningly. "What if all my words and actions show that I'm in love with you?" The guy blurted out, working up the courage. "What then?" he asked and looked April straight in the eye. "As you can see, I'm in love with you, and there's nothing you can do about it," Kevin stated flatly. April stood in shock at what was happening. Of course, she'd asked the question, fully confident that he wouldn't dare answer. But here things happened a little differently. Oh, even the visitors were paying attention to them. Now Kevin was the only one who knew how much effort that confession had cost him in public. He was starting to get pissed off by now at Epi's silence. So you like me?" EPI interjected. She then inquired if Kevin had forgotten how he'd knocked her tooth out. "It was a long time ago, and it's not true," the guy said indignantly. Besides, he recalled that EPI had maimed him then, too. Indeed," April agreed. Kevin hesitated for a moment. It seemed to him that everything would be okay now, and she would reciprocate. April, however, had no intention of doing that. She said that if she did, Kevin should have stopped liking her a long time ago. The words were like cold water on the boy. He didn't seem to be himself. April decided to finish him off by telling him that she didn't like kids like him. She turned and walked briskly in her own direction. Kevin yelled something about age discrimination and the fact that he and EPI were only a couple months apart. April stopped. She wanted to know what Kevin liked so much about her. "You're pretty." "Pretty," was all Kevin could reply. "Oh," EPI sighed quietly. She didn't know what else to say to that. An awkward silence hung in the air. "And that's your entire reaction?" Kevin inquired, dumbfounded. EPI calmly replied that there was nothing surprising about it. "Then, what do you like about me? Only say things that can be fixed?" Kevin asked, following April's lead. The girl simply replied that she liked beautiful people too. Kevin resented out loud that no one but EPI had ever called him ugly before. "Are you mocking me? Put some kind of ugly filter on my face?" The boy persisted. EPI, on the other hand, emphasized that everyone's tastes are different. Kevin finally stopped. Epi's answer hurt him to the core. He wondered quietly if EPI had said so much just to reject him. "April, it's my birthday today," he reminded her and asked in a sad voice if she couldn't have rejected him on another day. April looked over and noticed tears in Kevin's eyes. "What? Are you crying?" she said in surprise. He tried to pretend that he wasn't crying and that it was just her imagination. "Am I disturbing you guys?" came someone's voice familiar to EPI from nowhere. For some reason, Joshua had this knack for showing up on time where needed and when needed. Kevin remembered this guy. Oh yeah, because he'd seen him before. And to him, Joshua was none other than April's older brother. Kevin, thought confused, immediately served up a very low bow to Joshua. "Hello, April's big brother," he said hello. Joshua nodded demurely. Kevin realized he'd better leave. He wished Joshua a good day and made a quick retreat. April and Joshua only stared in silence as Kevin ran away. "Bro, were you eavesdropping or something?" asked EPI as soon as Kevin was out of sight. "Yep," Joshua smiled. He had noticed that little EPI had already become so adorable that she was now bringing the boys to tears. "What are you talking about anyway?" asked April angrily. So Joshua asked him to repeat for him what he had said when he went to see Epi's teacher. The girl furrowed her eyebrows and said she wouldn't repeat what he had said. "Either way, I won't date. I definitely won't," she stated confidently. Joshua thought for a moment. He explained to EPI that it's okay to feel attracted to someone when she grows up, but he also emphasized that it wasn't okay to hurt others. "You can thank them for liking you first and reject them afterward," Joshua advised. April felt guilty. She said out loud that she hadn't done anything wrong with Kevin, but Joshua pointed out that guys don't just cry for no reason. To which EPI replied that Kevin cried because he's a snotty boy. The girl also admitted that when they were younger and started fighting, Kevin would always snot, no matter who won. "You know how to fight?" laughed Joshua. April emphasized that it was when she was little. Joshua had picked up on the fact that April was still small even now. EPI hated to hear that. She didn't think she was little anymore. Joshua smiled puzzled and measured Epi's height defiantly with his palm. He noted aloud that April had indeed grown a little. "Even acting nice to me now," he remarked. Suddenly he took Epi's hand. The girl froze in place. What is he going to do?" "Thank you, little EPI." Joshua thanked the girl quietly and placed her own money, left under the plate in the cafe then, into her palm. "If your brother finds out, not only will he say I blackmailed his sister, but he'll put her in jail," the guy said. EPI indignantly pointed out that it was N blackmail, and she paid for the goodies. Joshua asked in surprise if it was worth 200 yuan. EPI replied that she had decided to give it to him anyway. Joshua lowered his gaze. Epi's words seemed to upset him. "Why did you give me money? Do you think I'm poor?" he asked. "No," April replied quietly. It was only now that she was beginning to realize the feelings that her act might have caused in this grown boy. "No, I don't think you're poor," EPI began to justify herself. Oh, how embarrassed she was now in front of Joshua for what she had done. EPI now felt like she might have humiliated him in that way. The girl apologized sincerely to Joshua. The boy looked at her with an understanding look. Yes, she was still a silly child to him. Epi's eyes glistened with tears. She realized that she might have upset Joshua's feelings with her words. Now April blamed herself for her impulsiveness. She often made decisions with her heart, forgetting to think with her head. She lowered her head guiltily. April felt more small and foolish than ever. Standing in front of this mature and sensible young man, she apologized once again. Kevin, meanwhile, went back to the karaoke bar. His friends were already waiting for him. They were very happy about the arrival of their friend, while the birthday boy himself literally had no face. The guys noticed that Kevin was downcast and decided to dedicate a song to him. Except that with the words of the song, they were slowly killing their comrade without realizing it themselves. Kevin cried. He couldn't contain himself any longer. It was such a sad celebration for this boy today. First love and first disappointment on such an important day. Just then, April, along with Joshua, approached the bus stop. "You've been pretty busy, and I've had enough of you. That's why I feel lousy," April admitted. April thought it was unacceptable to let Joshua buy her a drink because he worked so hard to earn the money. And besides, she'd noticed that she had a friend with her. Joshua wondered in surprise why EPI was suddenly so polite. "Daddy used to tell me, if there are feelings of Togo that you did something wrong, you should confess it right away," April explained. The girl thought her words had hurt Joshua, which was what she thought was considered inappropriate. Joshua gave April a friendly pat on the cap and stated that he wasn't offended in the least. The boy asked her to keep the money and use it to buy candy. April indignantly declared that she didn't like sweets. She immediately tried to take the money back, but Joshua instantly quashed the attempt. Then just keep it so you can buy something you like, he suggested. Joshua lowered his gaze and promised, in a serious voice, that if he didn't have money sometime in the future, he would borrow it from April to eat sweets. He asked if she was willing to do that. The girl remained silent. Of course she was in agreement. Soon, April's bus pulled up. The girl stepped into the vehicle and the door closed behind her. Joshua remained standing at the bus stop. He watched the bus leave and waved goodbye to April. The bus touched down, and EPI watched Joshua standing at the bus stop for as long as it was possible to do so. As she drove past the waterfront, April's heart sank with excitement. She watched the setting sun and thought of only one person, Joshua. EPI didn't understand why this grown-up guy was so firmly lodged in her soul. She tried to shift her thoughts to something else, but she kept coming back to Joshua's image. Oh, she even wrote his name on the fogged glass of the window on the bus. Joshua. What a beautiful name. She wished she could write it over and over again. The bus stopped, and April was distracted from her reverie and brought back to reality. She quickly erased the writing on the glass. Everything reminded her of him. Even the money he had so carefully placed in her hand today seemed to retain the warmth of the scent of his hands. April's young heart seemed to know her first, pure and sincere love. Many passengers got off at their stops, and soon EPI was alone on the bus with her anxious thoughts. She looked at the money and thought, do hardships come as you grow older? At home, EPI opened the gallery on her phone and nostalgically decided to look through the photos. There were pictures taken during the middle school commencement ceremony. Back then, Nora had been wailing about the fact that Kevin Wilker would be in the same class as her. EPI looked at the pictures and didn't notice that she had opened the phone book. EPI looked at the pictures and noticed herself opening the phone book. Oh, and somehow EPI had accidentally, or maybe on purpose, sent Joshua a text. The adrenaline she felt when she did that is beyond words. But what's done is done. Early morning October. April was sitting at her desk doing something. Suddenly, my mom knocked on the door and asked if EPI was awake yet. You're going to be late for sports day if you're still not up, she remarked. I'm on my way, April replied cheerfully. She was already fully packed and ready to go out. What had April been doing at the table all morning? No one would have thought she was counting her money. Now she was about to leave, and the cute piggy bank was still on the table. For candy, was the inscription on the piggy bank. After leaving her room, EPI met her mom in the kitchen. Did they take the name of today's event from your brother's university? Mom asked her daughter. EPI remained silent and got ready to eat the jam sandwich that was already waiting for her on the table. After a hasty breakfast, EPI took a snack with her as well. Her mother carefully handed her a t-shirt, noting that she had washed it in honor of the day. She said she'd change at school, mentally noting that the bald birch had no taste for such things. So April finally got to school. Already in the schoolyard, horns everywhere were calling for enrollment. Long jump, second-year girls. Volunteers, please come to the registration desk. The school sirens trumpeted. Someone called April's name. The girl looked around in confusion. It was Malika Rouge who beckoned her over. Sign up here, she suggested with a smile. April walked up to the front desk. Oh, gods, her brother was sitting among those who were recording. Not this, EPI thought. This student doesn't meet the requirements to participate, Adrian said caustically, glancing down at his sister. Get out, he added and made a careless hand gesture that meant it was time for her to leave. What kind of demands? April said, and glared at her brother. It seemed that she was ready to sizzle him at that moment. Height, Adrian replied shortly, knowing full well that with that answer, he would awaken a fire-breathing dragon in EPI. April asked indignantly, since when did long jumping require a proper height? God, you could tell by the look on her face that she was going to punch her brother in the face. Adrian continued to play with fire. He loved to tease EPI. Without hesitation, he decided to say that April wasn't even 120 centimeters. Although in reality, EPI was about 155 centimeters tall. It was just that Adrian liked to tease his sister. You think so too, don't you, little brother? Adrian asked his comrade and nudged him with his elbow. Joshua sat at the table next to him with his head down. I think he was asleep. Rubbing his eyes sleepily, Joshua raised his head and looked at Adrian in bewilderment. What April hadn't expected was to see Joshua here. Her heart nearly jumped out of her chest at the sight of the guy. I'm right, Joshua. She's not even 120 centimeters. Adrian snickered again and suggested that his sister just give up. What's 120 centimeters anyway? EPI got more than a little pissed off and reminded her brother how tall she really was. What's really 155 centimeters? Adrian asked, making a surprised face and throwing EPI a look down at him. Student, you look like a junior in high school. The older brother decided to finish April off. He also asked her to remind him of her height next time, remarking that it was pretty easy to forget about it while looking at her. April was ready to throw herself at her brother out of anger. She didn't understand if Adrian wanted her to tell everyone that she was 155 centimeters tall. Adrian opened some kind of magazine and took a quick look at the lists. Second year, Class 1, April Brooks, number 0155. Adrian smirked as he read. It made him laugh at the fact that EPI had that number, as if she wanted to prove to the whole world how tall she was. I didn't pick that number! April shrieked. Joshua, too, had apparently finally woken up and come to his senses. April noticed that he smirked, too. Your sister is pretty interesting, that's good, Joshua remarked aloud. But Adrian smirked and disagreed with that opinion. Not really, he said haughtily and with a sneer. That super t-shirt of hers is probably something that even doughboys wouldn't wear. He jabbed wryly at April. April's anger level had reached its maximum limit. The young girl was pissed off at those two old farts. With a sharp and deft movement of her hand, April snatched her number sheet from them and walked away. She was red with anger, thinking that it was probably their way of making fun of the kids. The boys just laughed at her. Malika saw EPI walking quickly through the stadium and decided to catch up with her. The girl asked if April knew the brothers. Malika noticed that they seemed much older than they were and asked how EPI had met them. They go to the same dance studio as my mom, EPI stated, thus wanting to make the two look quite old. My mom dances with them a lot, even invites them over to our house for dinner. That's how I know them. EPI continued to lie without the slightest embarrassment, being angry at Adrian and Joshua. Malika was taken aback at such news. Speaking of dancing, do you mean the 7 beautiful fairies? Asked Malika. EPI confirmed that was exactly what she was talking about. Ha ha ha. At this point, April gleefully pictured Adrian and Joshua with huge alpahalas dancing with the elderly grannies. Malika remarked thoughtfully that it was pretty trendy right now. It's not so bad, EPI agreed, noting with a smile that people the age of those guys liked that kind of dancing. Meanwhile, a loud announcement was sounded for students who had finished warming up to head to the area to compete. Keep up, the coach commanded. Penultimate, no luck, April thought, looking at the number sheet in her hand. Mentally, the girl also noted that it was very hot in here, and it would be really nice if she could get this over with early. Suddenly, someone came up and grabbed her by the cap. April shrieked in surprise. And who might that be? Cautiously, she opened her eyes and noticed Joshua sitting right in front of her. He squatted down next to her and smiled sweetly. Baby April is dressed beautifully today, he complimented sweetly. April cringed, so much so that she wasn't expecting to see him right here, right now. I wondered why he'd come up to her. Before EPI could even think about it, she suddenly heard some clicking sounds nearby. What was going on? The girl was on her way. Turns out it was Adrian, who came up from the side, who was taking her picture. Oh, he'd snuck up so stealthily and had already snapped a few pictures. Not bad, little one. You might as well enter a beauty contest. He sneered again. April flinched and pulled away. She wondered why her brother was taking her picture. He replied that Dad and Mom had asked him to do it. He also noted that it was rare to see April dressed as a girl. No! Why don't you watch yourself? April asked indignantly and tried to snatch the camera from her brother. But the man raised it so high that it was just out of reach. "Tell your brother he looks good. Otherwise, I won't stop." Adrian didn't stop. Adrian continued to hold the camera in his outstretched hand, and April, for her part, continued to struggle trying to reach in and take it away. Of course, her struggle was almost futile, since Adrian could actually give it to her. Joshua was only amused by this picture. He sat back and only smiled as he watched. But at some point, Joshua couldn't take it anymore. He decided to intervene. "Will you stop bullying my sister already?" he asked with a smile, and pushed Adrian's hand away from April. April went into a stupor. She was now standing between two grown men, like she was between two fires. Such a spontaneous intervention seemed to puzzle Adrian greatly. A mute question lingered in the boy's eyes. He looked at his friend with bewilderment. "So, did you hear that?" "Started not touching me," April said smugly and hid behind Joshua's back. Adrian froze in bewilderment. "Wah! Who's your brother?" He was taken aback for a moment. April pointed her finger at Joshua. At that moment, her silence was more eloquent than any words. "Good buddy." Adrian smiled indulgently. "That's not a bad twist. Consider yourself lucky," Adrian emphasized grudgingly. April looked out from behind Joshua and made a face at her brother. Just at that time, the coach announced that contestant number 01-154 was coming out. Then she told the contestant number 01-155 to get ready. April heard her number and was instantly energized. She gave her cap to Joshua and asked him to hold it while she got ready for the competition. During the conversation, she called Joshua brother again. This alarmed Adrian. He pondered on why on earth she was calling him that. Before taking part, and before it was her turn, April decided to warm up a bit. She soberly assessed her strength and realized that she had 0 muscle mass. The girl knew that she was no good at sports anyway, so she decided that she would just do a quick jump and come back. The invitation whistle blew. It was a command for April. The girl gained acceleration and rushed forward and mentally coaxed herself not to be nervous. April ran with all the strength only she was capable of. "EPI, you can do it!" cheered the girl Malika from the crowd. Bald Birch was watching the race intensely. Adrian was diligently taking pictures of everything, and Joshua was standing nearby mentally cheering April on. Things seemed to be going even better than just fine. April was running with all her legs and was about to jump. But suddenly, for some reason, at the very path, the girl abruptly slowed down. Oh my God, what happened? Everyone stared at April in surprise. April herself stopped in a stupor and didn't know what to do. This looks like a total failure. What had frightened her so much? And what to do now? Of course, already standing by the path, the girl decided that she had to jump. So she made a pathetic attempt to jump. One leap and the jump was made. The coach stared at the girl in surprise. April was announced that her score was only half a meter. To her horror, April heard gossip and giggles behind her back. Many were laughing at her result. Someone even remarked that, as a toddler, he had jumped farther than she had. The girl wandered dejectedly back to her starting position. A second attempt has been called. "What's wrong with your sister?" She was accelerating normally, and then she stopped abruptly right before she jumped, Joshua said, puzzled. There was a snapshot of himself. With a smile looking at all the pictures he had taken, the guy stated that the little one was too timid and was probably afraid to fall. The second attempt wasn't much better than the first. April was announced her score. It made a mere 0.8 of a meter. Bald Birch began to rebuke the already downcast April. "April, what is this score? Where's your fortitude?" he asked, and pointed out that her score affected the honor of their class. He asked the girl to try harder this time, pointing out that this was her last attempt. April wandered back to her starting point. As she passed her brother, the girl noted that he couldn't avoid gloating this time either. "Your jump?" "Yeah, 1 step of mine and that one's longer." He laughed. April wanted to cry. At a time like this, of course, she would have liked to hear her brother's encouragement, not his reproaches. But alas, she couldn't change her brother's mind. April reached the special mark and started the starting position. She tried her best to set herself up this time, and yet the girl's nerves were already on edge. She swallowed her saliva nervously. Her throat was dry and she was thirsty. "Come on, April, one more push!" The girl clenched her fist and prepared to run. There was a loud whistle from the coach, and April sprinted forward. She ran fast. Her attitude this time was very determined. Yes, she would definitely do it now. Oh, but suddenly something happened that made everyone present freeze in a stupor. Everyone was literally standing there with their mouths open and looking frightened. During the race, April accidentally stumbled. Her foot twisted, making a loud crunching sound. EPI was pierced by a searing pain, and she realized that something irreversible had happened. Instead of the expected triumphant leap, April fell to the sandy path. "Malaya!" the terrified brother Adrian shouted in horror. The girl rose to her knees and froze in place. She was in a lot of pain and also ashamed of such a failure. Her brother, teacher, and Joshua were already running toward EPI. "EPI, are you okay?" the bald-headed Birch inquired worriedly. He had started to berate himself for what he had said to EPI before the jump. Now he was saying that April shouldn't have overexerted herself, since she would have been scored anyway. "I'm fine," the girl replied in a shaky voice. It didn't sound very convincing. "You bet." She actually felt a terrible, hellish pain in her leg. It was impossible to even touch it. April pressed her lips together, and tears came to her eyes. She was in so much pain. Joshua gently took EPI under her elbow and wondered if she could stand up. The girl turned away from Joshua. She was embarrassed. In addition to the pain, she felt ashamed and helpless. That's when Adrian took a seat next to his sister. Supporting her under his arm, the guy asked why she couldn't jump normally. God, even in this situation, he couldn't just be supportive. "Because you bullied me," replied EPI honestly, dropping large tears. It was obvious that Adrian regretted his behavior. Maybe it was because there were still people here, or maybe it was because his conscience had suddenly awakened, and he felt ashamed. "Get in," he said, and gave his little sister his back. EPI stopped crying for a moment and looked at her brother. Did he really mean it? It looks like Adrian has really decided to make it up to EPI. He said he was going to take his sister to the nurse's station. Teacher Birch suddenly decided to turn to Joshua. "You're April's brother, aren't you? I would like to apologize to you for not being able to take care of her," he said, and patted Joshua on the shoulder. Just at that moment, EPI was climbing on her brother's back. Both she and Adrian, of course, heard Birch's words. April felt embarrassed. She realized she was in trouble. It was Joshua who had once come to the teacher as her brother. Adrian turned, and he and Joshua looked at each other. Adrian was probably the only one who didn't understand why Birch had called his friend his sister's brother. Bald Birch stared at Adrian, curious as to who he was. EPI was ready to admit that today was the worst day of her life. Failure after failure literally haunted her today. April was visibly nervous. She frantically tried to find a way out of this awkward situation. Yeah, and she was the one who'd caused this mess in the first place. The thoughts were running around like crazy in her head. EPI couldn't think of anything better to do than to declare that Adrian was her father. Having said that, the girl grabbed her brother's neck so tightly that he couldn't utter a word. God, she had just given Adrian a viper's girth. The boy found it hard to breathe and almost lost his breath from such a tight embrace. EPI realized she'd just said some crazy shit. She knew it was bad, but April had done it because she was afraid of getting burned and then calling her parents. So EPI decided she had no other choice. Teacher Birch scratched his bald head in puzzlement. He couldn't even find words for the shock. Joshua decided to break the situation up. "We'll take care of April. Don't worry about that, especially since you have other students that need your supervision," he said, and promised that they would take EPI to the infirmary. "All right, I understand you. Then hurry up and take care of her," the teacher asked. Adrian turned away from the sin and wandered forward with April on his back. April looked back and looked at Joshua doomedly. Now she had to explain herself to her brother, and she knew it. Oh, what was she going to do now? Now, moving farther away, EPI waited for the dreaded question. Adrian furrowed his brow and asked when he'd suddenly become a father to her. April was eloquently silent. God, what was there to say to him? She didn't know what to say. "Did you hurt anything in there at all?" his brother asked in shock, and assumed that, along with his leg, his sister had also clearly hurt her head. "Why are you yelling at me?" EPI asked. She then decided to change the subject and asked her brother to let her go, stating that she didn't want Adrian to carry her anymore. Adrian recalled that EPI had hurt her leg. He also emphasized that if he let his sister go, she would hardly be able to walk on her own. "But I'll take it and walk!" EPI was stubborn. She rebuked her brother for constantly yelling at her and bullying her, and so April was unwilling for him to carry her. Adrian was tired of her flighty behavior and asked if his sister could behave appropriately. April defiantly let tears fall and plugged her ears. "Why should I listen to you? You're always making fun of me," she repeated again. The girl stated that all this happened because of his camera. According to EPI, that was the reason why she was so nervous. "Actually, you're the one who said that my jump isn't even equal to one of your steps," she reminded, offended, and tapped her brother on the shoulders. Adrian, on the other hand, started making excuses that he was just messing with her, but April's resentment was unstoppable. She pounded her brother on the back, but he continued to carry her. She would have kept on carrying her for a while longer if Joshua hadn't shown up and called Epi's name. "I'll carry you," he said, and looked intently at the girl. April looked around in surprise. Oh, she just couldn't believe her ears. Had Joshua really offered to carry her? "You want him to carry you?" his brother asked with a furrowed brow, looking back at EPI over his shoulder. Well, his sister's silence could only be taken as an affirmative answer. "Great," Adrian said, though in truth he was hurt and uncomfortable. The guy crouched down and April slowly slid off his back. "Hop in," suggested Joshua generously. EPI hesitated. "Bro will carry you," Joshua added and squatted down, giving EPI his back. After a brief moment of doubt and deliberation, April decided to take Joshua up on his offer after all. She settled on his back and the guy carried EPI across the stadium straight to the infirmary. On the way out, Joshua asked if April was hurting anything else besides her leg. She quietly admitted that she had bruised her arm as well. Joshua didn't stop and continued his interrogation. He wanted to know if EPI had told him everything or if she was still in pain. April told him about the pain in her knee, too. The boy tried to cheer April up. He asked her not to cry, assuring her that they would fix everything for her. April tilted her head and rested her chin on his shoulder. It was so peaceful with him. She felt like she was behind a rock wall with Joshua. Joshua smiled. He was pleased with the warmth of the little girl. Halfway through the ride, Joshua asked April to take off his cap. EPI frowned. Why did he ask that? The girl wondered. Maybe he was just hot in it. He must be, because not only were they walking in this heat, but he had to carry it on his back. April took off Joshua's cap, and he motioned for the girl to put it on herself. The guy looked around and asked with a smile if EPI thought it was rather sunny today. April pulled the cap over her head and thought for a moment. She didn't know what to say to such obvious things. For a moment, she felt awkward, thinking of Joshua talking to her only about general topics, just to avoid the awkward silence. Of course, what else was there to talk about with a little girl like her? While EPI was pondering, he was just arriving at the nurse's station. April was seated on a bench. There was a nurse waiting for them. After examining April, the nurse concluded that everything was fine and that it wasn't that serious. The girl turned to Joshua, asking him to spray the sores and ice them. She also noted that EPI couldn't exercise for a few days. Joshua inquired if they needed to go to the hospital, but the nurse replied that it was just a sprain and there was nothing wrong with it. However, she still recommended a visit to the doctor to rule out serious muscle or bone damage just in case. In that case, Adrian offered to go and get it checked out after all. April lowered her gaze. She didn't really want to go to the hospital, but apparently it was necessary. "I'll finish dressing the wounds and then we'll go to the hospital," Joshua said. "Let me do it," Adrian asked. Joshua looked at his friend in surprise. He was ready to concede this important wound care mission to his friend, but suddenly April herself declared that she didn't want it. It seemed that Adrian was beginning to realize that his sister was becoming more and more distant from him. He felt guilty, but another feeling had also settled in his soul. Perhaps it could be called jealousy. Adrian did not insist. After a short pause, he said that in that case he would bring water for his sister. Joshua looked at EPI and wondered if she really trusted him that much. "My brother will rush and end up messing up, and I don't want to get hurt again," April answered as honestly as possible. Though, of course, she was silent about the fact that she was just pleased with Joshua's concern. "Is little EPI afraid of pain?" he asked with a smile. "Who isn't afraid of it?" EPI answered question for question. "Okay, I hear you, but it's still going to be a little rough around here, no matter how you do it," he remarked, and wondered if little EPI could be a little more gentle. "Can you be gentler?" April resented him. Joshua emphasized that it wouldn't hurt that much, just a little bit. "Isn't that normal?" he asked, to which April responded with an emphatic no. Joshua saw the fear in her eyes. He promised to do it as gently as possible and asked the girl to give him her hand. EPI sighed doomedly and slowly pulled her hands toward Joshua. That was very, very slow. "Brother, my revenge will be terrible. Don't lie to me," she asked threateningly. "Is it really that serious for you?" Joshua asked, bewildered. He didn't know if he was ready to do it himself. "Then maybe I'll get someone else to do it?" he suggested, explaining that he wouldn't want little EPI to get revenge on him. "No," said April confidently. "You don't like everything," Joshua muttered, and wondered if the little girl could be a little more rational. April squeezed her eyes shut and held her hands out to the boy. He sprinkled them generously with a special sanitizing solution. "You're already in second grade in middle school, but you still haven't learned how to be sensible?" Joshua asked, staring intently into April's eyes. EPI recalled what she'd told Joshua before, that she didn't know what it was like to be rational, but in her opinion, that in no way negated the fact that she was rational. "Really?" Joshua asked, holding the absorbent cotton on the girl's knee. April replied that she had always been like that. Little Eppie's a good girl," Joshua said thoughtfully, slowly removing the cotton pad from the wound on her knee. April froze. His touch was so careful. It was obvious that Joshua was trying not to hurt her in the slightest. "You told your teacher that your brother was your father. Do you think he believed you?" Joshua asked suddenly. April admitted that Teacher Birch had never seen her father. "Does your brother really look that old?" Joshua was still perplexed, noticing that Adrian was even wearing the same uniform as him after all. And EPI had an excuse for that too. She figured she could justify it by saying that father and son just liked to wear paired clothes. Joshua looked at the girl judgmentally. He decided to see if the little girl had any conscience at all. EPI didn't see what the problem was. She looked at the boy questioningly. "I treat you so well. And you don't hesitate to bully me instead of your brother?" he asked reproachfully. Yes, EPI heard the reproach in those words. "Did I make fun of you? Don't accuse me!" April exasperated, deciding that the best defense was offense. Joshua didn't react to the anger from her and simply asked EPI to give him her hand. April obediently held out her hands. Joshua gently began to treat the wounds on her palm. April was patiently silent. He wasn't hurting at all. "Bro, why are you ignoring me?" asked EPI, worried lest the atmosphere suddenly become awkward. That was what the girl feared the most. April asked if Joshua didn't like what she'd said about pairing clothes. Without waiting for an answer, she called him picky. Joshua threw EPI a tired look. Ta continued to go over aloud the version she thought Joshua might have been offended by. No, you're the offended one. No, you have a good memory. EPI persisted, trying to get the boy to talk. Joshua was increasingly surprised by EPI. He couldn't understand the point of talking about having a good memory when April had said something about hurting him. He glared at the girl. She looked away and said it wasn't her fault that Joshua had taken her words so personally. Running her eyes over his again, EPI stated that of course she didn't mean that. Then what did you mean? Asked Joshua. April replied that she just wanted to compliment him. Your face is dirty. Wipe it off, Joshua remarked, and handed EPI a packet of wet wipes. I can't see anything. April started to get cranky and didn't bother to grab the tissues. Yes, those words were meant for some action on Joshua's part. And why are we acting like this? Asked Joshua with a smile. Epi's plan and calculation had worked. Joshua opened a pack of tissues and took one out and began wiping the girl's face. Baby, why do I feel like I'm your servant? Joked Joshua. April was silent. When he ran the napkin across her cheek, she felt a slight chill on her face. But at the same time, she also felt an inexplicable heat rush to her skin. I didn't ask you to do that. EPI continued to malign her when Joshua had already finished his business. The boy suggested that April count together how many times he had helped her. April said that if Joshua needed help, she would be happy to help him. So, what are you going to help me with? Asked Joshua. That insidious question caught EPI off guard. Naturally, she didn't know how much help someone like her could be to a grown, self-sufficient guy. So it was April's habit to change the subject immediately if she didn't know what to say. That was the case this time. She pretended to stare off into the distance and asked with feigned interest where her brother had gone. He probably left you, Joshua suggested. And April angrily emphasized that she still hated him. The girl complained that Adrian liked to pick on her. She recalled that Adrian had picked on her even when she had fallen. Joshua lowered his head, puzzled. You didn't think he was just worried about you? He asked suddenly. Really? That was something EPI had never thought about. You told the teacher out of the blue that he was your father. Shouldn't he have had questions after that? Joshua puzzled the girl. He wondered if EPI didn't see his actions as caring. But it really hurt the girl that he had asked it so rudely. She wished her brother would treat her more gently. You want him to be softer? Joshua grinned and asked if it wasn't EPI herself who was making things difficult right now. He's got a point, April thought. And at that moment, Adrian was just approaching. He'd heard the last thing his friend had said to his sister. Adrian often seemed cold and callous on the surface. In fact, he loved his sister very much and wanted them to understand each other. EPI looked away when she saw her brother. She was now a little ashamed of the way she'd behaved toward Adrian. Adrian walked over to Joshua and, handing him a bottle of cold water, asked him if they had done everything. He replied that they had, and Adrian thanked his friend. Drink some water, and then we'll go to the hospital, Adrian suggested. He squatted down next to his sister and asked if she would drink or not. April silently took the water. She noted to herself that it was room temperature. Her brother must have made sure she didn't get sick. Your little brother has a class this afternoon, so your daddy is taking you to the hospital, Adrian said, then turned his back to his sister and motioned for her to climb in. God, now April was certain that her brother didn't mean her any harm. She realized that there was truth in Joshua's words. Adrian asked April to hurry up. The girl looked first at her brother, then at Joshua, and froze in indecision for a moment. You have couples too, right? Joshua turned to his friend, but Adrian replied that Joshua must have looked at the wrong schedule. Joshua understood. He realized that Adrian really cared about his sister and wanted to make up. He also realized that he had lied about the schedule. April seemed to have realized that too. Was she really so dear to her brother that he was willing to skip class? Now EPI realized that she had often been unfair to Adrian, but it was in her power to make up for it. The girl walked over to her brother and deftly slid onto his back. Adrian asked if she was holding on tight. Yes, EPI replied, and put her arms around her brother's neck.